Chapter 562. The auction gradually came to an end as more and more valuable items were auctioned off. Brando managed to buy a piece of adamantine worth 300,000 tor, which was one of the main materials for making steel armor. With this piece of adamantine, along with the White Knight Ebden's relics and Amon's life savings, he would soon be able to start making the armor. Nun Princess Magadol also bought a silver ornament from the Wind Elves as a token of appreciation and gave it to Amandina as a gift. The last item of the auction was a round shield that had been passed down from the Kurlutz Empire's Kanav dynasty. However, the two of them were not interested in it at all. The situation in Ampere Seal was really unsettling. Brendel and the Princess of the Antiburo Duchy quickly reached a final agreement, and the two of them left the box early. Magadol had to return to the Holy Cathedral immediately to avoid suspicion. After that, she had to find a way to find out the true intentions of the Holy Cathedral of Fire. She had to find out what the new Archbishop of Moros was doing with Erewhon's nobles. Brando was quite satisfied with this meeting. Although he did not get much information, at least he had a solid ally in the Holy Cathedral. He also understood the attitude of the Cruz Empire. Brendel trusted Princess Magadol's character. In another history, she was known for her righteousness and kindness. She was even known as the heart is more than the exterior. Princess Magadol was not ugly, and her beauty was not inferior to the half-elf Griffin. She was known as the Queen of Ains, the Queen of the Elves who was active in the era after the War of the Holy Saints was known for her beauty. Brando asked Amandina to stay and settle the bill with the auctioneer. He then left the auction hall and stopped a carriage at the entrance. 74 Scorpion Shell Street. The carriage quickly left San Pino Square and went through a winding alley. Even in a prosperous trading port like Ampere Seal, there were still slums. The carriage stopped at a shanty area in the suburbs. The houses in this area had long been bought by Sioux. Brando walked straight to a house with the back of Ampere Seal Bay. As soon as he reached the door, the gray wooden door opened with a creak. A feminine face appeared behind the door, but there were fins on her chin and ears. Her skin was like green jade. She looked at Brando with her pale yellow eyes. "Nice to meet you, Ednice." Brando smiled. She was a female shining scale Naga named Ednice. Ednice nodded and moved aside to let Brando in. "My lord." There were two male shining scale Nagas in the house. One of them was Sani. He had been injured in a battle with the other races a few days ago. He could not fight for a while, so he was sent here to act as the liaison officer for Tanajal's new lord. Brando was now the most important friend of the Shining Scale Nagas. He had cured the queen with holy water but the main reason was that the shrewd Queen Cold Dew valued Brando's potential. There were not many people in the human world who could casually take out holy water #1. However, it was not the Nagas who spoke first. It was Sue who was standing behind them. The innkeeper's daughter had a worried look on her face, as if something terrible had happened. "My lord, something has happened." Brando was slightly stunned. He had only been away for a few hours. What could have happened in such a short time? Could it be that the nobles had put Princess Griffin under house arrest? What happened? Did something happen to the princess? He could not help but ask with a frown. Sue shook her head and took out a letter. Brando took the letter and read it. His expression immediately became strange. Previously, he had asked Sue to find a way to collect information from the north to confirm the reason for the change in the Holy Cathedral of Fire's attitude. The letter said that the Golden Lion Mane Beastmen of Erewhon had knocked on the door 3 days ago, and the Holy Cathedral of Earth had mobilized for war half a month ago. This meant that the Holy Cathedral of Earth had started the war about 3 months earlier. The reason was, the Holy Cathedral of Earth had asked the Holy Cathedral of Fire and the Kingdom of Erewhon to return their long-lost sacred sword, Alrangaya. Brando held the letter and did not know what to say for a moment. He racked his brains but still could not understand why the Holy Cathedral of Fire had changed their attitude towards the Erewhon royal family. He did not expect the reason to be so simple. It was simply because the Holy Cathedral of Earth had started the war earlier. In the end, it was because of him. How did this news get in? It's from one of my informants in the north. The letter was sent through Naga. Now that Ampere Seal has sealed off the roads in and out of Ampere Seal due to the arrival of the monsoon season, news from the outside can't get in at all, the tan girl replied methodically. Brando glanced at Sani and thought that this guy must have brought the letter in. Is the person who got this reliable? Not reliable. He's just doing things for money. But it should be enough to pass the message. Brando nodded. The news of the Lion Mane Beastmen starting the war earlier should have been known in the north by now. It was just that Ampere Seal had blocked the news from spreading. The situation was serious. The war between the Holy Cathedral of Fire and the Holy Cathedral of Earth was just a small episode in the history of Erewhon, but it was not the same for the people of Cruz. The impact of this holy war among the players of the Cruz Empire was no less than the War of the Black Rose to Erewhon, and even more so for the people of Cruz. This was a religious war, and the Holy Cathedral of Fire would definitely go all out. And as a prelude to the war in Erewhon, it seemed that the Holy Cathedral of Fire was determined to maintain stability. Even if they used force, this was great news for the nobles in the north, but it was bad news for Princess Brando's side. "My lord, what do we do now?" The innkeeper's daughter did not know the subtle difference, but she knew that it was not good news. At least she had heard that the Holy Cathedral of Fire's attitude had changed recently. Her Royal Highness must have been put under house arrest. Now the Holy Cathedral of Fire will definitely not allow her to leave Amberlight. They will force Erect to take a stand, and the nobles and the king's faction will be in danger next time. Brando thought for a moment. The king's faction should have received the news by now, maybe even earlier than him. The king's faction must have more informants in the north. Although they did not have Nagas, they must have the means to pass information into Amberlight. But if even Erect had changed sides, the princess should be in a desperate situation now, and even whether she could leave safely was a problem. He suddenly turned around and asked, "Where's Roman?" Miss Roman went to the trading area. "There are many companies in Amberlight that have relations with us." She said that she wanted to get in touch with the leaders of these companies. The war is about to break out and the market will inevitably fluctuate. Miss Roman is worried that it will affect the livelihood of the territory. Sue seemed to be about to talk about this matter. "She's alone?" Brando frowned. He knew that those big merchants looked good on the surface, but they were not good people behind the scenes. "Scarlet went with her too." Sue glanced at him and replied. Brando nodded. After Scarlet was given the dragon's blood, she was almost at the peak of the gold rank. In terms of pure strength, even he was no match for her. With her by her side, the merchant lady's safety could be assured. "When they come back, tell them not to go out again. Also, tell everyone to leave the hotel and gather here." Sue nodded and frowned slightly. Is the situation already so tense? She knew part of Brando's plan. Getting everyone to gather meant that the situation at the nobles' meeting was irreversible, and the next step was to intervene with force. But to be honest, the power of the Tanajal territory was insignificant in this huge chess game. "Sue, do you have a problem?" "I don't have a problem." Sue shook her head and threw away the trace of unhappiness in her heart. Brando suddenly became silent. He suddenly realized that it was selfish of him to bring these people into the whirlpool of this political struggle. Sue was the daughter of the owner of the hotel. The Roman dreamt of being a big merchant. Freya wanted to help the people of Bucci. Scarlet was just wholeheartedly trying to gain the recognition of others. There were also the old soldiers of the Red Copper Dragon Army and the young people of Tanajal. The fate of the royal faction and Princess Griffin did not have much to do with them. They were here because of his idea. What right did they have to sacrifice so much for the rise and fall of the royal family and to change the fate of a princess, even to the point of sacrificing their lives? Different from the deep-rooted prejudice of the royal faction and the nobles, in Brando's eyes, there was no difference between people. Even the life of a princess was not necessarily more precious than that of a beggar. Princess Griffin was more important in his heart, not because she would become the regent of the kingdom in the future, but because he could not forget the precious memories of the past. The days when he fought side by side with his companions, with the goddess of war, and with thousands of people who held the same beliefs. But these memories did not exist for others, not even Freya. His goal was originally a bit selfish, but there were some things he had to do because he knew the results. "Sue, do you trust me?" Brando suddenly asked. The dark-skinned girl raised her head and looked at him doubtfully. "What we are doing now might not necessarily succeed, but it will definitely be right. If we do it, we might fail, but if we don't do it, we will definitely not succeed. The nobles cannot save Erewhon, but they will not be able to live peacefully in a corner." Brando thought of the Second War of the Black Roses that was bound to happen in the future. The kingdom would burn fiercely in the flames of war, and the gentle reforms would not be able to save Erewhon. If he did not go all out, history would repeat itself sooner or later. Sue lowered her eyelids. "I don't understand, but Miss Freya chooses to believe you, Sir Lord. Burying one's head in the sand can only deceive oneself. Is that what Sir Lord is trying to say?" She smiled. "Actually, it doesn't matter to me. Father's opinion is my opinion. He chose to believe you, Sir Lord, not because of some great principle, but because you have never failed until now. If we fail, everything will end here. If we succeed, we can continue. Is that what you mean? It seemed like it was indeed like that. He only had one chance and he could not choose. If he did not succeed, then he had to fail spectacularly. Because even if he did not do it, it would still be a failure. He nodded and relaxed. He turned back. Sani, then according to the plan, please help to attack the port. I will provide you with the location and defense details of the Chamber of Commerce and the Ampere Seal Navy's warehouses. The looted goods can all be your spoils of war. But if possible, please try to minimize civilian casualties. We are not bloodthirsty villains. Sani snorted. There is a detailed defense and we will try to avoid civilians. But is the map you gave us okay? The layout and defense of Ampere Seal are in the hands of the Holy Cathedral of Fire, right? Can you get it? Brando smiled mysteriously. Of course he could not get it and he did not need it. After decades of experience in another history, he already knew the layout and defense of Ampere Seal like the back of his hand. Don't worry, there will not be too many Navy soldiers left at the port. I will create the conditions for you. Other than a few warships from the port, the Navy of Ampere Seal mainly consisted of monk soldiers from the Holy Cathedral. Brando was at least confident that he could lure the monk soldiers away. Besides, the storm was coming, and the Holy Cathedral would not expect the attack to come from the sea. By the way, he suddenly thought of something. Can I trouble you to use the demon whale again? He mainly wanted to use the demon whale to cover the retreat. The port still had a few warships, and the demon whale had the special effect of suppressing storms. When they retreated from the sea, they would have to pass through the storm-ravaged waters. Brando did not want to be eaten alive after escaping Ampere Seal. Sani hesitated for a moment but finally nodded. Brando had done a lot for the Shining Scale Nagas, and this time it was time to return the favor. In addition, the Shining Scale Nagas had suffered great losses in the West Sea War. Brando's suggestion to create an opportunity for them to loot the warehouses of the Ampere Seal Navy and the Chamber of Commerce was an offer they could not refuse. Ampere Seal was the largest trading port in Erewhon and the entire Southern Territory. If they could seize the Ampere Seal Navy this time, the Shining Scale Nagas could almost make up for their losses in this war. Thank you so much. Brando was really surprised now. His relationship with the Shining Scale Nagas was just an unintentional act on the way to Ampere Seal. He did not expect that this unintentional act would become the most crucial part of the success of this trip to Ampere Seal. It's just a mutual benefit. Sani was still as dumb as he was in history. He wrote off the favor Brendel owed him with just a few words. If the shrewd Queen of Cold Dew knew about this, she would definitely punish him by sending him to the abyss of the deep sea for reform. Next, Brando decided to meet the half-elf girl again. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 563. Just as Brando had predicted, an hour after he finished reading the letter, the same secret letter arrived at Princess Griffin's desk, lying quietly on the ebony table. Outside the window was the scene of Ampere Seal before the storm. The wind and rain were dark and gloomy. The haze that interweaved over the entire harbor made the whole day pass. Although it was only noon, it was already approaching dusk. Lightning occasionally flashed through the clouds and thunder rumbled. The pale white light shone through the window and projected the shadows of the trees on the carpet. What's the situation outside? Princess Griffin asked. We've already been surrounded by 3 layers inside and outside. The possibility of breaking out of the encirclement is not high. However, if Your Highness the Princess decides, we will definitely do our best to open a bloody path for Your Highness. The knight who was kneeling on one knee was drenched. The water from his red cloak soaked the expensive carpet, but no one blamed him. No need. You can leave first and change into a dry set of clothes, Sir Letterer. The half-elf girl nodded and replied. The knight responded gratefully, got up and left. What's going on with the Haurangaya? She raised her head and looked at the others in the room. Has anyone seen it appear in the kingdom? This. Oberway's expression was a little strange. Actually there is, and it's one of our people. One of our people? Griffin was a little unhappy. Why didn't I know? I just found out about it, Your Highness. Oberway hurriedly explained. It's Rose. Rose? That Rose Delar from Audine? Delar's youngest son, the current heir of the Audine family, Count Audine? The princess thought for a moment before remembering this person. Weren't they sent by my father to the south to find the whereabouts of the Lionheart sword? She suddenly fell silent. In just half a year, the kingdom had changed and the Lionheart sword was now in her hands. It seemed that in the blink of an eye, Erwin had undergone a drastic change. "What's going on?" she asked. "Audine is outside. Why don't we let him describe it personally? It's inevitable that there will be some deviation in the words of an outsider." Oberway replied. Griffin nodded. After waiting for a short while, the pale-faced Austin entered their line of sight. Previously, he had almost lost his life in the Battle of the Loop of Trade Winds, but he was saved by the great druid Andrew, who was passing by. Although the external injuries on his body were mostly healed, the internal injuries were still there. After the long journey, he looked even more defeated now. But even so, he still respectfully bowed to Griffin. "Count Audine, is your injury serious? Do you need to rest?" The half-elf girl looked at him and could not help but frown on her face. Even though she had heard that this group of people had met with an accident in the Loop of Trade Winds, she didn't expect them to be so miserable. "It's just a small injury. There's no need for that. Her Highness, on the other hand, is more urgent," Austin answered. In fact, before the split of the royal party, he was more inclined towards the firstborn, but in the past 2 months, his camp had unknowingly wavered. Every time he thought of the young man he had met in the Loop of Trade Winds, he could not help but remember the choice he had made. When he knew that the Lionheart sword was in the hands of the princess, he did not hesitate to come here. "Then please tell us about the situation," the princess replied. Audine nodded and began to tell the story of the battle. He was not a good storyteller, but he was a good storyteller. The adventure in the Loop of Trade Winds, which had lasted for several months, was reduced to a story of less than 10 minutes in his mouth. Even so, he was still able to explain the cause and effect of the adventure clearly. When he finished, the room was silent. Oberway had already known, but Griffin could not help but take a deep breath. "You mean the sword is in that person's hands? He's the Lord of Tonagel? His name is Brando, right?" "Yes." Audine nodded, but in his heart, he thought that the princess knew the young man. "Is it possible to get him to return the sword to the Lionheart sword?" Fleetwood suddenly broke the silence and asked. Everyone could not help but shake their heads. Although Fleetwood was Erwin's top court wizard, he did not know much about politics. Haurangaya was one of the goals of the Holy Temple of Earth, but it was not the real reason for this war. Regardless of whether Haurangaya existed or not, the war would continue. Even if the army was mobilized, there was no way they would retreat. Audine looked at the chief wizard with disdain. He was originally from another faction and was biased against everyone here except for Griffin, especially Fleetwood, who was a capitulator. "I've never heard of Aween giving up the benefits without being forced into a war. Even if the Holy Temple of Earth agrees, the Lionheart sword will not. The mobilization of an army is not a small matter, teacher." The princess shook her head. "Since it has already happened, why don't we think about what to do next? My lords." Her gaze swept across everyone. "Think of a way to mobilize the troops in the south, and at the same time express our stance. Duke Vero has yet to express his stance. He and Count Randner are mortal enemies, and the Holy Cathedral has very little control over the south. We can win over his support." Makarov immediately replied. "Who will board the sinking ship?" someone asked. "No, if we still have the 3 territories, there is still room for maneuver. The Lionheart sword has already taken the initiative to attack, and the north will be attacked from both sides. The Holy Temple will not ignore this." Everyone in the room was silent. Griffin looked deeply at the cunning fox. This plan seemed to be impossible in Pegasus' starry skies, but it was not impossible after careful consideration. Makarov had probably seen through the trick. If Tonagel's army and Vero attacked Randner together, and secretly reached an agreement with the royal faction, the 3 southern territories would be on the princess side. Coupled with Karsuk and Grinoires, whose stance was unclear, the royal faction would be effectively divided into the north and south. Although without Arek's participation, the Holy Temple would not dare to touch the royal faction in Ampere Seal anymore once Tonagel's army and Vero attacked. In the end, the Holy Temple would have to compromise with the royal faction, but in that case, Erwin would only be divided. It was a wise choice, but Count Audine furrowed his brows. Everyone present was smart and no one could fool anyone. Oberway and the rest had their hands on the hilts of their swords. He could not help but look at Makarov. There was no need to say such words in front of outsiders. What was this guy trying to say? Was he trying to express his stance? This was probably Duke Anthony's stance. Once the north and south were divided, Arek, who was stuck in the middle, would not have an easy time. Everyone knew that Duke Anthony and Arek had an irreconcilable feud. The princess shook her head gently. "I reject this proposal. The royal faction can be defeated, but Erwin cannot be divided. Everyone's expression changed and only Oberway frowned slightly. Odin looked up and carefully sized up the beautiful princess. It was as if he had sensed some hidden power in her for the first time. Your Highness, Makarov could not help but remind her. After we die, there will be people who will remember the glorious flag of the late King Eric. But if Erwin is divided, there will no longer be a chance to reunite. The half-elf girl's silver eyes seemed to be able to see through the fog of the future. She sat there and answered calmly. This was the tragedy of a small country. Erwin's fate was still in the hands of the Cruz people. This kingdom had been able to maintain its unity until now, but once it was divided, the Cruz people would not give it a chance to reunite. The princess and even everyone present knew this, but some people pretended not to know. Let's talk about the current situation first. Oberway interrupted. No need. Griffin suddenly understood something and sighed. You all can leave first. I need to be alone for a while. Tomorrow's noble meeting and future matters will be handed over to you all. The room was silent. Everyone looked at each other, nodded, and left the room. The last one to leave was Austin. He took a deep look at the princess, bowed, and closed the door as he exited. The sound of footsteps gradually faded away. When it was completely quiet, the half-elf fairy princess stood up. She was not tall, and with the petite body of an elf, she looked a little weak. She walked to the back of the chair, grabbed the back of the chair with both hands, and dragged the chair to the window with difficulty. She panted and sat down by the window, staring at the scenery of Ampere Seal in the midst of the storm. The sky was dark, as if in the next moment, the harbor would be swallowed by darkness. After a long time, the door behind her opened and a voice said, Your Highness, Lord Makarov and the others have gone to see the little prince. Only Lord Oberway and Count Odin left together. Griffin bit her lip and her face was pale. They were going to stake everything on one throw, but should she stop them? Could she bear to let Haruz die with her? Besides, what ability did she have to stop them? She had already expected this moment. The royal faction was already acting on their own will. As for whether it was still as pure as before, no one knew. She raised her head, and the lightning illuminated her face, making it appear as white as jade. King Eric, is everything in Aween coming to an end at this moment? She stared at the endless darkness in the east. She knew that there was a new empire growing there. Erwin would eventually become its nourishment. The door quietly closed again. But Princess Griffin did not seem to hear it. She stared at the scenery outside the window as if she wanted to take it all in. No matter how dark it was still Erwin's territory. At least for now. Her face was deathly pale, but there was no joy or sorrow on her face, as if she was a puppet. At this time it's better for your body to cry. A gentle voice said. Griffin was shocked. She reacted quickly and pulled out a silver dagger from under her skirt. Clang. A sharp sound rang out, and the dagger clashed with a black longsword. Her Royal Highness took a step back and finally saw the young man who was wrapped in a wet cloak. At the same time, Brendel heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't expect the princess to react so quickly. She almost succeeded. If the difference in strength between the two was not so great. But Brando did not expect that Griffin would not stop. Instead, she gritted her teeth and pounced on him with a determined face. It was as if Brendel had just woken up from a dream. He suddenly realized that the princess was probably begging for death right now. She wants me to kill him. She wants me to kill him? Is the princess crazy? Brando's heart sank. For a moment, even his movements slowed down. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 564. The princess stabbed her sword towards Brando's chest. The silver light on the tip of the sword seemed to split the dark rainy night, reflecting the thunder and lightning outside the window. For a moment, the whole room was only left with a single white color. Thunder roared. The sword passed through Haurangaya's defense, but Brando seemed to have a circle of transparent ripples around him, causing the tip of the sword to slide to the side involuntarily. Griffin felt as if she had hit a smooth stone surface. The rebound made her unable to hold the sword and it flew out of her hand. The Marshal Adania, behind Brando, the commander of the White Lion Legion during the Second Renaissance era, was suddenly unlucky. The precious oil painting from the 3rd century was pierced through the left eye by the sword. Brando then reacted and grabbed her right wrist. The half-fairy princess' hand was soft as if boneless, and there was even a slight touch of warmth. But before he had time to savor it, a trace of determination in her eyes made his hair stand on end. Left hand. Brando's heart skipped a beat. He grabbed the princess' left hand, and there was a shining dagger in the princess' left hand. Now that both of Princess Griffin's wrists were firmly grasped by Brando, the two's posture was a bit ambiguous. She gritted her teeth and raised her knee towards Brando's lower abdomen. Brando was scared out of his wits. He never thought that the princess would be so decisive. In a moment of desperation he even forgot that he still had the conflict aura. He pressed Griffin's hands against the wall. Thunder rolled through the clouds and lightning once again flashed across the earth. Ahem! Princess Griffin groaned, her face showing a painful expression. She lowered her head slightly, and her long silver curly hair trembled slightly. Before she could exert her strength, she was pressed against the wall by Brando's body, and her attack could only be stopped halfway. But the posture between the two was not ambiguous. Brando's whole body was almost on top of her, and Erwin's princess was just an inexperienced girl. She had never been so close to a strange man before. Brando's strong manly scent made her neck a little hot. At this point, Princess Griffin finally accepted her fate and closed her eyes. Her body softened and her long eyelashes trembled slightly. She actually shed tears in a daze. Once this kind of emotion broke out, it could no longer be controlled. Sparkling tears burst out like a dam rolling down her cheeks. In an instant she became a beauty who washed her face with tears. Brendel immediately panicked. "My dear princess, don't cry. If you want to commit suicide, why don't you stab yourself? Why are you stabbing me with your sword? You almost ruined my little Romaine's happiness for the rest of his life, but in the end, it seems like I'm the one who caused all this." But the pitiful half-fairy princess was just too beautiful. Brando looked at the bright and white jade-like face under the thunder and lightning. Thinking that this was the future Princess Regent, who would hold up the whole of Erewhon, he could not help but feel a rush of excitement. "Don't cry." Princess Griffin did not seem to hear him, and her tears kept flowing. She was not a weak person, but these days in Ampere Seal had taught her what despair was. No one would help her, not even the royal faction, and they could only watch as she fell step by step into the abyss. The only thing that supported her was her belief, but now, even her only hope had been destroyed. Although she was still holding on, she could not hold it in anymore. That doesn't sound like our princess at all. How can a crying princess lead Erewhon out of this predicament? Princess Griffin. If you cry again, I'm going to leave. Brando could not help but awkwardly coax her. He remembered that the only experience he had with women in his previous life seemed to be getting along with his senior. Is this considered experience? But Princess Griffin was obviously not a child. Once she could not hold back her feelings, they would completely explode. She was like a marionette who had lost her spirit. Only the teardrops that fell down like pearls proved that this extraordinary half-elf girl was still alive. After many fruitless attempts to negotiate, Brando finally could not hold it in anymore. He suddenly lifted Princess Griffin's chin and then lowered his head. Lightning pierced the rainy night in an instant, and fireworks hung in the distant sky. The half-fairy princess opened her eyes. Brando's kiss was unstoppable. He felt as if a door had opened in his heart, and the deep feelings that were contained inside surged out like a rushing river. Those were the most sincere, most honest feelings that would not lie. He thought that he was just full of respect for her ideals, but he finally understood that this respect was also mixed with the love between a man and a woman. He came here just to get her, to let her live, and not to repeat another tragedy in history. The figure that he looked up to again and again was now in his arms. Her soft body was like a feather, weightless. It was both real and illusory. He could not help but let go of Griffin's wrist with one hand and grab the girl's slender waist. He hugged her tightly as if he was afraid that she would disappear again. He carefully felt the princess' soft lips, and then he took an inch and wanted a mile. He gently pried open the half-elf girl's teeth. But it was at this time, Griffin's face was full of anger, and her face was red all the way to her neck. She bit her lower lip and stared angrily at Brando. It was as if everything that happened suddenly woke her up, and she even forgot about the situation at the moment. There was only one thought left in her mind. How dare you? You deserve to die. You. Griffin's pretty face was instantly covered with frost. She subconsciously reached for her sword, but when she grabbed nothing, she realized that she had lost her sword, and it was stuck in the oil painting behind the lecture. You are too much, Mr. Brando. I trusted you so much, but I did not expect you to be this kind of person. I'm sorry. Brando's brain was also a little blank. He did not even dream that he would be so impulsive and do such a thing. Everything seemed to go with the flow. Could it be that this was all that he wanted subconsciously? He hurriedly shook his head and threw this ridiculous idea out of his mind, but he was faintly looking forward to it. He had inherited Brando's feelings, and in his heart, he deeply doted on the willful and unreasonable behavior of the Roman lady, but the other half of his heart was Sophie. In comparison, in this half of his heart, perhaps the protector princess and his senior held a more important position. Griffin gently exhaled as if she had calmed down. She closed her eyes, trying to turn herself back into the calm and composed princess. How did you get through the blockade of the holy sanctum? And what are the guards outside doing? They actually let you? Yes. Was it Freya who let you in? She lowered her eyelashes and her tone was very cold. The original Mr. Brando had become an unfamiliar you. This made Brando feel a little uneasy. I have seen Freya, but it has nothing to do with her. He patted the cloak on his body. With this cloak, it was actually not difficult to get through the blockade of the holy sanctum in the rainy night. There was a little bit of trouble when he entered the manor, but fortunately, he bumped into Freya and the others who were patrolling. I will not vent my anger on anyone. Freya is the daughter of the Duke of Everton, and she has qualities that we do not have. Moreover, everyone has their own needs and the so-called princess is probably just a joke now. The half-elf girl smiled, but her smile was a little sad. She leaned back on the chair that was half the height of a person, just like the girl who listened to Oberway's story under the warm sunshine. But with her wet silver hair, she looked indescribably sad and pitiful. Your Highness, Mr. Brando, Griffin suddenly interrupted him. She raised her head, and there was a touch of enchanting charm in her silver eyes. Do you want me? Brando could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. He suddenly realized that he could not refuse this proposal. He was actually moved. He knew what the princess meant, but he could not help but refuse. She was the future princess of Erewhon, the dream lover of countless people. As long as he opened his mouth, he could have her. The brightest pearl on Erewhon's crown. Brando shook his head. I cannot refuse, Your Highness. Your beauty has long been engraved in my heart. But not now and not like this. The princess in my heart is the princess who dared to reprimand Erewhon in the nobles' meeting. Only her strength is worthy of Erewhon's hope. Brendel paused for a moment before he answered, one word at a time. Princess Griffin's expression was a little complicated. What do you want me to do? Her tone returned to the previous coldness in an instant. Brando knew that she was still a little concerned about her recklessness. In fact, he was also very annoyed now. But if he could do it again, he would still choose to do it. Although he felt a little apologetic towards the future Princess Regent of Aween, at that moment, he clearly touched on something that he had deliberately avoided. His heart, his real purpose in coming to this world. That purpose was now gradually becoming clear. Brando was about to speak, but at this time, footsteps suddenly sounded outside the corridor. It was two people. Princess Griffin's face changed. If outsiders saw her and Brando alone in a room at this time, then her reputation as the Princess of Erewhon would be ruined. The princess could not help but glare at Brando. She had not yet settled the score with the Haurangaya, and now there was another trouble. But when she turned her head, she just happened to meet Brando's eyes. Griffin's face could not help but turn red. Quickly hide. She gritted her teeth and whispered. I'd where? Brando was also dumbfounded. He had heard the news from Freya that the royal faction had gone to Prince Haruz. Why did they turn back in just a few minutes? The closet. The princess pointed to the closet on the side. At this time the footsteps were getting closer and closer. She suddenly realized that her hair was still messy. She quickly pulled it up with her hand, but subconsciously pressed her lips. She looked up at Brando and Brando was getting into her closet. Princess Griffin could not help but reply fiercely. Brando, this time you have to help me. This is the payment in advance from the princess. Payment? Brando almost stumbled into the closet. He suddenly felt that the whole thing had become strange. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 565. Your Highness. The sound of footsteps stopped outside the walnut door, followed by a female voice. It was the female knight that Brando saw the other day. Maynard? Griffin held her hair with one hand and smoothed out the wrinkled dress with the other. And this old subject, Your Highness. A low and crisp voice replied. Lord Oberway. Griffin let out a sigh of relief and in a few seconds she returned to normal. Please wait a moment, I'm about to go to bed. Okay, please come in. The door opened and Maynard and Oberway stood outside with a cold face. The wolf knight seemed to have been caught in the rain or had just returned from outside, and his body was wet. Maynard closed the door and Oberway immediately said, "Your Highness, Makarov and the others have gone to meet His Highness? You don't have to say any more, I know everything, Oberway." Griffin interrupted him and looked up at her two close subjects with bright eyes. She and Maynard had known each other since they were young, and their relationship was more like that of close friends and sisters. Maynard had once vowed to become her knight, and she was now fulfilling her promise. The Princess of Aween couldn't help but smile. She wondered if her sister still remembered the oath she had made back then. She then looked at Oberway. Although Fleetwood was her and the little prince's teacher in name, in reality, her swordsmanship and political knowledge were all taught by this lone wolf. "Teacher, Sister Maynard, please get ready, we're leaving Amberlight immediately." Oberway was slightly startled and could not help but look up. He had prepared a long speech to cheer up the princess, but he didn't expect that his student's endurance would exceed his expectations. He was very familiar with the princess's character, and immediately guessed that something had happened during this time. Thinking of this, the backbone of the royal faction looked around the room suspiciously, and his eyes quickly fell on the open window. "Teacher, you don't have to guess, I've thought it through. I can't give up the future of Erewhon, and I can't let Duke Anthony divide the kingdom. You said that the glorious flag is still in Erewhon, but can I pick it up again no matter how difficult the future is?" Griffin asked. "How do you know the result if you don't try, Your Highness?" Oberway retracted his gaze and looked at the princess with approval. "But the most important task now is to return to my territory, where I will launch a crusade against House Cipher and the Holy Cathedral. I believe the people will stand with us. The people of Erewhon have never forgotten that they fought bravely against the people of Cruz, only those who have forgotten the oath of the nobles." Princess Griffin nodded. Oberway bowed slightly in agreement and said, "Then the Holy Cathedral must have known that there was a disagreement among us, but they must not have expected us to break up so quickly. This is our only chance." He turned around and said, "Maynard, how many Royal Knights can you mobilize?" The head of the Royal Knight Regiment, Cadler, was a student of Fleetwood and a die-hard member of the royal faction. At this time he would definitely not side with the princess. Oberway had previously arranged for Maynard to enter the Royal Knight Regiment in order to curb the power of the head of the regiment. But until now, Maynard only had prestige among the younger knights. Maynard lowered her head and pondered for a moment, then said with a cold face, "Not more than 30%, and they are all students who graduated from the Knight Academy. They lack actual combat experience." "That's a little less." The princess frowned. "Maybe we can seek outside help." Oberway smiled slightly. "Outside help?" Erewhon's princess panicked and couldn't help but look at the wardrobe. "Count Audine seems to be very appreciative of Your Highness' opposition to splitting the kingdom. When I sent him out earlier, he said that he intended to side with us. He has a group of mercenaries who came back with him from the Black Forest. If we can persuade him to join us, it will not only help us in our current situation." The Wolf Knight slowly explained the origin of his wet clothes. "Teacher, can you persuade Count Audine?" Griffin's eyes flashed with a trace of surprise, not only because of this unexpected foreign aid, but also because her idea had been approved by the traditional nobles. Although Brando's forces that stood on her side had already made a name for themselves in the war in Tonajal, the princess still didn't think that a new force could have much power. In comparison, she valued Brando's personal use as a gold-rank swordsman more. That was indeed the case. In comparison, Count Audine's mercenaries who had returned from the Black Forest and had experienced hundreds of battles could play a much greater role in the current situation in Amberlight. Moreover, Count Audine had an ancient family behind him, as well as a large number of nobles who had the same political aspirations as him. This was a huge help. To be able to gain the goodwill of this force was really precious to the princess's forces who were in danger. However, Brando, who was hiding in the wardrobe, scoffed at this. Oberway and the princess still wanted to rely on the power of the nobles. Of course, this was understandable. The shackles of thinking were not so easy to break. Besides, the kingdom indeed needed capable people to govern. Brando had to admit that there were many knowledgeable and capable people among the nobles in this world. Oberg VII established the youth guards and established the academy to select talents from the local areas in order to break the monopoly of power of the old nobles. However, all of this had just begun, and Erewhon had already fallen into the flames of war. However, the future Erewhon still benefited from this. A large number of talented people were selected from the youth guards to enrich the kingdom, bringing about a decade of prosperity for the ancient kingdom of Erewhon. If it wasn't for the Second and Third War of the Black Rose that interrupted this process, Perhaps the Princess Regent would have been able to slowly get the broken car of Erwin back on the right track. Thinking of this, Brando couldn't help but sigh softly. He continued to listen to Maynard's cold voice outside. The secret passage leads out of the city, but the nearby areas are under the control of the Holy Cathedral. Further south is the territory of Duke Arek. The students of the Knight Academy had already planned their escape route in advance, and the only conclusion was that they had a chance to escape Ampere Seal by water. But we don't have a ship, Oberway replied. A ship won't work either. The storm on the Sea of the New Moon is coming, and we can't go out to sea at this time of the year, Maynard added. No, we might have a ship. Griffin suddenly thought of something. She looked hesitant, and Maynard and Oberway looked at the princess strangely. The royal family had arranged spies and hidden escape routes everywhere. If there was a merchant ship here, they wouldn't be surprised. There was a saying in Erwin that the king had the most secrets. Although it wasn't completely true, it was still accurate. Unexpectedly, after hesitating for a moment, she suddenly said, "Let me introduce you to a guest." A guest? Maynard was slightly taken aback, but Oberway was stunned for a moment before a look of realization appeared on his face. Griffin bit her lips and knocked on the wooden table with her finger. "Come out, Mr. Brando. I hope you will fulfill your promise and help us leave this place wholeheartedly." Brando didn't expect the princess to push him out at this time, but he was only surprised for a moment and quickly returned to normal. The two people outside seemed to be close to the princess. If she was willing to let him appear at this time, it meant that the princess had at least acknowledged him as a member of this circle. He exhaled, opened the door of the wardrobe and walked out. "It's you?" Maynard raised her eyebrows slightly. Oberway also raised his eyebrows but didn't rush to speak. On the other hand, Brando was a little embarrassed. Why not? A man and a woman alone in a room, and she was even a princess of a kingdom. It was inevitable that others would have some guesses. Moreover, he did do something that wasn't so honorable. Although it was just a moment of impulse, Brando couldn't help but blush a little. He couldn't help but laugh and said, "Sir Oberway, we meet again. I heard that you've seen me before, but it's a pity that I didn't have the chance to meet you before." He was naturally talking about the matter of Oberway secretly following them. It wasn't the princess who told him about it, but the little female dragon who reminded him. In addition, the princess unintentionally revealed some details in the letter. Brando only needed to guess who he met. In fact, there were only a few people who could move freely around the princess. Makarov was still the leader of the mercenaries in the mountains in the south, so naturally he couldn't appear in Fortress Reden. Oberway heard this and smiled slightly. "Mr. Brando's swordsmanship is really unexpected. I didn't dare to believe it when I heard that you were nearing the elemental realm. I didn't expect the truth to be right in front of me. Now I believe that there are indeed geniuses in this world." He complimented Brando but immediately changed the topic and asked, "But why is Mr. Brando here now? I want an answer." "Teacher," Princess Griffin's face was slightly red, of course not because of shyness, but because she was nervous about being exposed. "Mr. Brando has long been my knight. He is my spy, and this time he came to Ampere Seal to secretly help us. You already know about this, but I asked him to come here tonight because he has a ship that can be put to good use." "If I remember correctly, Mr. Brando came to Ampere Seal on Tanagel's ship, right?" The half-elf princess glanced at him. "Since when do I have a ship in my hands? So I'm a ship captain now?" Brendel was slightly taken aback. Of course he came here on a ship, but it was a genuine merchant ship. Now that the storm was coming, no merchant ships dared to go out to sea. Tanagel's relationship with the major merchant guilds in Ampere Seal was not that close. He did not expect the princess to be able to lie so well. However, he did have a way to get his hands on a ship. It was not by buying, borrowing or renting but by robbing. The Nagas were born to be good at robbing. Oh, they were pirates. He thought for a moment, quickly sorted out his thoughts and nodded. Princess Griffin's words seemed flawless, but in fact there were many loopholes. Who would have thought that the royal faction would be divided internally? Moreover, the news of the Lion Beastmen starting the war in advance had only been sent to her desk 1 or 2 hours ago. Her prearranged story was actually very easy to fall apart. However, at this time, Oberway's thoughts were still focused on Brando and the ship in his hands. He glanced at Brando and reluctantly accepted the princess's words, then asked, "But even if we have a ship, we can't go out to sea because of the storm. Does Princess Griffin intend to go through the Ampere Seal straight to the Wall of the Dead? But the sea route there is close to the sea in Arek province. Duke Arek will definitely use the navy to stop us." "No, there's no need." Griffin shook her head. "In the collection of the Anderla Cathedral, there is a ship's head from the time of King Eric. It is said that the ship's head was made from the teeth of the demon whale. It is said that the ship with this head can calm the storm. That's a good idea. Oberway's eyes lit up, but the vault of the Anderla Cathedral is not that easy to enter. I will ask Magadol for help. As for the person to sneak into the cathedral. Griffin looked at Brando. Me? Brando was stunned. He knew about the legend of the ship's head, but he did not know if it was true. Of course, it would be good if he could get this item. It was not to deal with the current situation, since he had the demon whale. Instead, he could use it to prepare himself for entering the Village of Storms in the future. The Village of Storms was a sea area south of the Loop of Trade Winds, outside of Marsh's protectorate. There was a huge instance dungeon there, where he could obtain a level 70 equipment set and a quest item to reforge a bronze body. The Village of Storms was ravaged by magic storms all year round, and it was a forbidden area for the Nagas. Without the Nagas' demon whale, the only way was to obtain items that could calm the storm. For example, the breath of holy water, the statue of Martha, or a forbidden spell that could control the weather. Of course, Brando did not want to complicate matters at this time, so he silently noted down the information and nodded. Griffin seemed to be satisfied with Brando's attitude. She could not help but comfort him. Don't worry, Mr. Brando. Magadol can move freely in the cathedral, and entering the vault is not a problem. Treasures are not important to the saints, but it is difficult for ordinary people to enter. Your mission is just to meet her and bring the items back. Besides, you are the only one who can move freely and gain Magadol's trust. Brando thought for a while and realized that what the princess said was true. He nodded pretentiously, but in his heart, he thought that he could use this opportunity to meet Magadol. The nun princess should be gathering information in the cathedral. Boo-hoo, I won't act cute if I don't update well. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 566. Griffin seemed to have untied the knot in her heart. Under her arrangement, everything was back to order. Brendel heaved a sigh of relief as he looked at the princess who had regained her strength. Although the princess who showed a rare look of helplessness was also lovely, he liked the princess in front of him more than the princess in front of him. Probably because she was more realistic and closer to the image in his mind. However, Brando did not let his guard down. Although the princess had temporarily pulled herself together, it did not change the fact that they were now in a difficult and dangerous situation. At least before everything was settled, Brando knew that the princess's faction still had an unavoidable problem to deal with. He did not intend to speak but waited for someone to bring it up. Oberway was meticulous, and the black-haired knight Maynard did not seem to be easy to deal with. There was no need for him to act smart. However, every time Brando looked over, his eyes could not help but be attracted by the black-haired knight. Maynard stood there quietly, her entire body exuding a very familiar aura. Familiar yet unfamiliar. The room fell silent for a moment. Maynard naturally noticed the young man's gaze on her from time to time, but every time she turned her head, she would see him quickly averting his gaze. Humph! The black-haired knight frowned slightly. Not far from her, the half-elf girl seemed to be arranging everything in an orderly manner. She turned her head and looked at Oberway. The wolf knight, who used to be sharp with his words, did not say a word. Maynard knew that he was hinting for her to speak. Your Highness, how should we deal with Prince Haruz? After a moment, she quietly asked. This sentence seemed to have hit the future princess of Erewhon. The girl froze and Brando saw her slender fingertips tremble slightly. This was a problem that could not be avoided. Back in the Knight Academy, the royal faction had been in charge of the little prince's daily life. At first, it seemed like a form of protection, but now, it had become surveillance and control. Right now, her brother was already in the hands of the royal faction, and Makarov and Count Bar were both giants among men. It wouldn't be easy to snatch her brother away from them. Of course we have to seize him. We can't let my brother become their bargaining chip. The princess frowned deeply. Right now, the only thing she could command was a cavalry composed of young cadets who had yet to finish their studies. Their numbers were less than half of the Royal Knight Regiment. Moreover, on the surface, the princess had yet to truly fall out with the royal faction. It could be said that both sides had no way out. Once the royal faction lost their last bargaining chip, they might even side with the Holy Cathedral of Fire. The possibility was small, but she couldn't help but worry. The spacious room fell silent. Why don't I make a trip there? Oberway replied. If there is no other way, we can ask the Knight of the Lake for help. Maybe, I will try to persuade Freya. Maynard replied quietly. There was not a trace of worry on her face. She was as calm as a statue. The Knight of the Lake's strength was probably second only to Andesha, whom Brando had met in the loop of trade winds. It was no wonder that Oberway thought of him. Even though the Lionheart sword was still in Freya's hands, the Knight of the Lake seemed to be protecting the future goddess of war. But it was only protecting her, and Freya might not be able to command this great god. In fact, Oberway might not be unaware of this, but the princess's faction really couldn't come up with any good ideas. Brando shook his head and finally couldn't help but interrupt. "I'm afraid it won't work, Lord Oberway. It won't be difficult to seize him, but we will have to adjust the itinerary." Adjust the itinerary? Everyone present was stunned. "I suggest that we don't leave so early. It's best to wait until the meeting starts." Brando replied, "Actually, it doesn't make a difference whether we leave sooner or later. Even if we leave now, it will be a sea of fire outside. It won't be much easier than killing our way out of the meeting." Furthermore, he wanted to continue, but the princess's eyes lit up and interrupted him. "Furthermore, the most dangerous place is also the safest place. If we want to escape, we definitely won't choose to do it at the meeting. Because of this idea, it might be easier for us to break through at that time. Of course, we don't have to kill our way out of the meeting. We can choose to enter or leave the Anderla Cathedral. That will be the time when the enemy's vigilance is at its lowest. And the key is that if we go to the meeting, Makarov and the others will let down their guard and think that the princess doesn't have the courage to go against them." Oberway nodded in agreement. Everyone present was smart. Brando had thought of this before them, but it didn't mean that he was better than them. It was just that he stood from the perspective of a bystander and jumped out of this period of history, so he knew better what would happen in the meeting. And the princess's faction had to face the unknown future. Who knew if the Holy Cathedral of Fire would be at their mercy the next time they met? But as soon as Brendel poked through the window paper, everyone present realized what was going on. "Then let's set it after the meeting. The royal faction still has a battle with Duke Cypher. Let's just watch the show." In an instant, the princess seemed to have the ability to grasp the situation. She smiled slightly and said with a hint of sarcasm, "If the Holy Cathedral of Fire wants to make a move on us, I'm afraid it won't be in a short period of time. After all, they have to wait for the Northern Coalition army to arrive, right? Since we are going to attend the meeting, can I trouble Mr. Brando to escort the prince out of the manor?" Although it was called escort, it was more like robbery. But Brando shook his head. "I'm not the right person for this. First of all, I don't know His Royal Highness. Second, I'm afraid that the army under Her Royal Highness is not enough to break out of the encirclement this time. I have an army in Ampere Seal now, and I will personally command them to assist Her Royal Highness in breaking out of the encirclement." Everyone present heard this and their eyes lit up. They couldn't help but look up at Brando. They didn't expect this princess's knight to actually bring an army here. Of course, Brando's current identity was a spy of the royal family. Naturally, this credit fell to the princess. Oberway couldn't help but look at his student again. Did she really expect today's situation? Only Princess Griffin's eyes were shining. Her Royal Highness asked Viscount Benninger to escort His Royal Highness Prince Haruz? Thunder and storm were converging over the entire city. The clouds were like a gray and black canvas. Layer by layer, the paint spread along the rain, and the storm clouds also changed shape. The rain washed the eaves. The rainstorm quickly weaved into a silver ribbon. The water droplets rolled along the brim of the hat and formed a thin stream. Fortunately, the oilskin cloak was not soaked. Freya turned her head, her gray-brown eyes sparkling under the night sky. She tilted her head and looked at Brando, her fair skin reflecting the faint light like jade. Brando nodded. The Viscount Benninger he knew was the youngest son of Duke Cypher. He stood in this camp because of his admiration for the princess. This person did not have a great reputation in history. Later on, he seemed to have become the head of the Cypher family. That was all. However, this person was loyal to Her Royal Highness Princess, and at the same time, dissociated himself from the royal faction. He was the perfect candidate for this mission. But for some reason he had a vague feeling that something was wrong. Was it because of jealousy? I heard. Freya hesitated to speak. Heard what? Brando turned to look at her. The future goddess of war had shed some of her youthful innocence, but there was still the shadow of the stubborn female captain of the militia in the countryside of Bucci. I heard that Viscount Benninger admires Her Royal Highness Princess. He was originally the youngest son of Duke Cypher. Him coming here means that he has betrayed his family. I think there is a reason why Her Royal Highness Princess trusts him so much. Brendel gave a non-committal grunt. Brando knew that Her Royal Highness Princess was not without tenderness when she was young, but she was more cold-hearted than the average person. Her family, House Covardo, and Benninger's family, House Cipher, could not be together. But Viscount Benninger might have really won Her Royal Highness Princess' heart. The rain poured down and lightning occasionally lit up the whole world, blending the world into a vast expanse of whiteness. The Anderla Cathedral stood silently in the rain. The whole building was like a silent wall, with statues of gargoyles and wyverns. Each of them were priceless art treasures. The two of them were hiding in a small alley a street away from the cathedral. It was only a short while before the appointed time with Magadol. He said that he was here to steal the statue, but in fact he was only here to meet Magadol. Now that he had the demon whale in his hands, there was no need for him to complicate matters in this troubled time. Freya was slightly envious. Most girls would not be able to resist such romantic things. It had to be said that Benninger's actions were indeed shocking in this world. As a noble, he had betrayed his family just to pursue his own love. That was a story that only existed in Knight's novels. But Freya, who showed her youthful side, was also quite cute. Brando could not help but look at the future goddess of war carefully. He did not know why, but he felt that he could only show his natural side in front of the Roman and Freya, as if he could relax. When it came to abandoning everything for one's dreams, the goddess of war was actually the same kind of person. And now, for the future of the goddess of war and the future of the kingdom, it seemed that he was doing the same thing. It was just that he was working hard for a different history. When Freya turned around, she was shocked by his expression. "Is there something on my face?" "No, there isn't." Brando quickly shook his head. "Why hasn't Princess Magadol come out yet?" Freya did not notice the strangeness in his heart and asked. She had always been an impatient person. Brando looked at the time. It was just right. But he raised his head and looked at the back door of the cathedral. There was still no one there. This made him frown. Usually both parties were very sensitive about time. Unless there was a problem, it was rare for people to be late. Besides, Princess Magadol did not look like a careless person. There was a flash of uneasiness in his heart. "Is there a problem, Brando?" Freya saw the clue. "It's already past the scheduled time." She frowned slightly. Could it be that Princess Magadol is in trouble? It's possible. Brando could only guess. Then what should we do? Brando's brows were almost wrinkled. He did not need the stupid ship's bow. He could come and get it at any time. In fact, he could almost guess the content of the letter that the new Bishop Moros gave to Wood. He came to meet Magadol just to confirm it. The safest way now was undoubtedly to turn around and leave. But Brando was a little uneasy. He felt that if he left without saying anything, it would be a betrayal to Princess Magadol, who might be in trouble in the Anderla Cathedral. It would be like abandoning a comrade. Brando felt that he could not do such a thing. "Brando, do you want to go in and look for her?" Freya whispered. "Magadol is a good friend of the princess." How do you plan to go in?" "I don't know. But we can try, can't we? There will be a way." She was taking things for granted. As expected, this stupid woman's nature hadn't changed. Brando shook his head. "No need." Before Freya could stare at him, he added, "I know. Come with me." To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 567. Miss Magadol. Even though it was raining heavily outside the Anderla Cathedral, it didn't change the silence and solemnity of this holy place. The main hall of the cathedral was a place for meditation and prayer, and during some celebrations, it could even accommodate up to 1,000 people to pray together. Thus, the interior of the cathedral was very majestic. 28 gray stone pillars supported a deep dome, and rows of benches were facing the central altar, forming a fan-shaped space. It was filled with a sense of majesty. Every day there would be a large number of servants in charge of cleaning the place. When they saw Princess Magadol walking in, they hurriedly stood up and bowed. Magadol was a high-ranking priest and a princess of a kingdom. Not to mention she was also Archbishop Wood's student. Now that Wood had left Ampere Seal and was about to go to the center of power in the headquarters, the status of the princess had also risen and become more and more respected. Magadol stopped and nodded to the crowd. Although she was born a princess of a country, it was rare to see the arrogance and delicateness of a noble's daughter. Although this was related to the education she had received, it was also due to the fact that she had a gentle temperament. The nun princess had always been known for her friendliness in social situations, and there was no lack of praise for her both inside and outside the holy cathedral. "Is Archbishop Wood here?" she asked. "Lord Officiant, he doesn't seem to see any outsiders, Miss Magidal." The servants replied. "I see." Magidal sighed in her heart. Although she had expected this, she still couldn't help but feel dejected. She thought for a moment and asked, "What about Lord Moros?" She called Wood the Archbishop, but she called Moros the Lord. Her attitude was clear at a glance. However, everyone was well aware of the truth and did not expose him. Moros was a cold person and had a strong desire for power. In the Anderla Cathedral, not many people truly acknowledged this outsider. One of the servants thought for a moment before replying, "The Lord Officiator seems to be receiving a guest." "Guest?" Magidal was slightly surprised. What guest would there be at this hour? "Who is the guest?" "It's Marquis Yoakum, and there's another noble we don't know." "It's him?" Magidal knew that Marquis Yoakum was on Duke Cypher's side, but he didn't seem to have a close relationship with the Northern Alliance. What was so important about him coming to the Holy Cathedral at this time? She frowned slightly. Thinking about what happened last time, she couldn't help but feel disgusted. "Miss Magidal, do you want to go over and take a look?" The waiter asked after observing her expression. "No, there's no need." Magidal shook her head resolutely, a look of disgust appearing on her face. Everyone looked at each other. It was rumored that the nun princess had a conflict with Marquis Yoakum, and now it seemed that it was true. But what they didn't know was that Princess Antoinette's face was slightly hot at this time, and her palms were sweating due to nervousness. She silently repented in her heart, and her heart was restless. She didn't know if Lady Martha would forgive her for lying in public. But no matter what, this was a path she had chosen and would not regret. "Martha above, please bless me with success." Magidal prayed in her heart. The candlelight in the narrow room was as small as a bean. The candlelight flickered, and occasionally a spark would burst out, illuminating the faces of the two people around him who were similarly dark and unclear. Brando knew that the second Archbishop of Ampere Seal, Moros, was a famous villain in history. However, he was slightly different from the great priest Amon whom he killed in the Loop of Trade Winds. Although Moros was sinister and cold, he was very self-disciplined. He lived a simple life and did not pursue materialistic desires. He was like an ascetic in his life. Note 1. Game history. Regardless of whether this image was faked, at least he maintained this image during his term. This person's relationship with the Erewhon nobles was neither cold nor warm. His political views were slightly biased towards the Cruz Empire, but at least he still maintained a relationship with the Erewhon royal family on the surface. But that was a story in history. Now, Brando was like a butterfly flapping its wings, influencing history to gradually deviate from its original track. The attitude of this new archbishop was also very different from the history. This small room was one of the guest rooms in the side hall of the Anderla Temple. As the Anderla Temple rarely received guests, there weren't many guest rooms and most of them were simple and plain. Moros and Wood had been handing over power for a while, but this new archbishop had been living here all this time. From this, it could be seen that he did not pursue materialistic desires. However, the two people in the room seemed to be a little restless, especially Marquis Yoakum. Although his image as a libertine was more or less a deceptive disguise, this Marquis' pursuit of quality of life was really similar to the other nobles. This room was simply like a slum to him. Although the tables and chairs were clean and bright, it gave him the feeling that there was always a layer of dust on them. Marquis Yoakum had only sat for a moment, but he already had the illusion that ants were crawling on his heart. Not to mention that there was still a heavy burden in his heart, which made him even more annoyed. However, the master had not arrived yet, so the two did not dare to act rashly. Finally, the sound of footsteps could be heard. Soon, Moros's gloomy face appeared outside the door. His distinctive aquiline nose was like his trademark. At this moment, Moros was wearing a golden red robe that he usually wore to preside over daily affairs. He had a straight face. He always had such an expression. At that time, the Erewhon players gave him the nickname of the Iron Man. It was not to say that he was impartial, but he was just mocking this guy's lack of expression. Marquis Yoakum did not dare to have such thoughts in his heart. Not to mention the identity of this archbishop, but more importantly, there was a behemoth standing behind him. Although Erewhon had defeated the Cruz people a few centuries ago, the Erewhon nobles today had become one of the groups of people in the world who feared the Cruz people the most in the world. It was a kind of irony. Both of them stood up and saluted, but Moros just nodded in return, showing his arrogance. Marquis Yoakum and the others did not find it strange, as if it was not the case. Cruz had been accumulating power for a long time, and the whole of Erewhon felt that they were inferior to him. "Marquis Yoakum, You must have something urgent to come here so late. Archbishop Moros did not have the intention to exchange pleasantries and went straight to the point. Yes. Marquis Yoakum smiled and returned to his usual self. Just as you expected, the letter we sent was effective, and the royal faction seems to have quarreled with each other. He laughed as he spoke, and when he got to the part where he was proud, he could not help but laugh sarcastically. Although Makarov and Fleetwood are very smart, they are driven by their own interests and appear to be short-sighted. They can only see the carrot on the stick and completely ignore the trap in front of them. From this, we can see the importance of a noble goal. Moros nodded and silently agreed with Marquis Yoakum's self-praise. In fact, this plan was proposed by the royal faction. They sealed off the news of the north, but at this time, they used the spies around the royal faction to spread the news of the Lion Beastman's invasion. As expected, the royal faction was in chaos. It was an open conspiracy, but they knew that Makarov and the others had no choice but to swallow this bait. This was the nature of the nobles themselves. Moros could not help but laugh coldly. It's funny that they still want to divide the north and south. I'm afraid they won't be able to live past tomorrow's sunset. Marquis Yoakum laughed proudly. Princess Magadal, who came out from the secret passage, was shocked when she heard this sentence. At first, she thought that they were talking about Griffin, but after listening carefully, she realized that they were talking about the royal faction. The royal faction really had a conflict with Griffin. The princess could not help but hold her breath. On one hand, she was skeptical when she heard Brando's treacherous words in the auction house, but she did not expect it to become a reality in the blink of an eye. On the other hand, Magadal could not help but frown. If the royal faction broke off relations, her close friend's situation would be even more dangerous. This was something she did not want to see. She shut her mouth, not daring to make a sound, and listened carefully. The construction and renovation of the Anderla Cathedral was done by the Holy Cathedral of Fire, and she was not the only one who knew about the secret passage. In fact, the new Archbishop Moros should also know about the secret passage, but he probably did not know that there was another key to the secret passage, so he let his guard down. It was because of this that she dared to boast to Brando. Even so, she still had to be careful. Moros' strength was not considered outstanding in the Holy Cathedral, but as a high priest, he had the strength of an elemental master. Although Marquis Yoakum was known to be a playboy, few knew that he had the strength of a gold ranker. The nobleman beside him also seemed to be extraordinary. Magadal observed everything outside through the peephole of the secret passage, not daring to even breathe loudly. At this time, Marquis Yoakum had just finished expressing his opinion, and Moros glanced at him coldly, looking a little unhappy. He was cautious by nature and hated arrogant people the most. Moreover, the royal faction was not really a fish on the chopping board. Among them, Buga and Fleetwood were elemental masters, and it would not be easy for them to stay. Among them, Fleetwood was a famous wizard, and it was common knowledge that wizards were much harder to deal with than swordsmen of the same level. He shook his head and replied, "Forget about the royal faction, the princess side is also not easy to deal with. Maynard and Oberway are both gold rankers, and among the royal knight loyal to the little girl, there is no lack of troublesome characters. Now there is also the Knight of the Lake who is stronger than Fleetwood. The key is that the Lionheart sword is already in her hands. I heard that Count Yenbao's 3 gold rankers are in Ampere Seal at the moment. More importantly, the young man is not inferior to the elemental field." Moros looked at Marquis Yoakum after he finished speaking. Yoakum's face twitched. "Humph, that's true. Although they are no longer united, we still have to deal with 4 elemental masters at the same time. Are you okay with that?" Moros glanced at the 2 people in the room coldly. "No problem." The noble beside Marquis Yoakum finally spoke in a low muffled voice. "Ah." Magadal could not help but let out a low cry. She finally saw the face of the last noble. It was an insignificant noble with a common face, but Magadal happened to recognize him. He should be one of Count Balta's retainers. The White Lion Legion. Has the White Lion Legion already arrived near Ampere Seal? The White Lion Legion used to be the pride of the Erewhon people, but that pride was no longer there. Marquis Balta was bought over by the eldest son of the king, and had already sided with the nobles of the north. However, unlike the Black Blade Squad, the White Lion Legion was a border guard, and their biggest enemy was the Cruz people. Unexpectedly, when everyone's attention was focused on the Imperial Army's Black Blade Corps, they subconsciously overlooked this force. But how dare they move away from the border? Is Duke Cypher crazy? Magadal's mind was in a mess, and at the same time she broke out in a cold sweat. Fortunately, the soundproofing of the secret passage was good, and her voice was not heard by the people outside. The nun princess sighed softly. Her hands and feet were a little cold, but she could not help but continue listening. That's good. Moros nodded and turned back. Have you chosen the person you want to identify? He stared at the Marquis sternly. This concerns the reputation of the Holy Cathedral, and is the most important part of our plan. Please rest assured. Marquis Yoakum immediately nodded and took out a small item from his pocket and placed it on the coffee table. That person is definitely reliable, and this ring is his keepsake. Moros did not speak and only nodded coldly as he picked up the ring. But at this time, the three people in the room heard a slight noise, as if something heavy had fallen to the ground. Who is it? The strongest archbishop was the first to react. He raised his hand and shot out a golden-red ray towards a bookcase in the room. With a loud crash, the bookcase suddenly burst into flames, and wood shavings and sparks fell like butterflies. At the same time, one of the walls in the room suddenly rumbled and slid to the side, revealing a secret passage. Moros immediately looked over, and saw Magadol sitting on the ground with a pale face. Miss Magadol. The new archbishop of the Anderla Cathedral had a pale face as he squeezed out the words from between his teeth. You have gone too far this time, and I think even Captain Wood will not be able to save you. But Magadol did not seem to hear, and only stared blankly at the ring on his hand. This is impossible, she murmured. P.S. Yesterday's chapter title was wrong and I missed the word whirlpool, sorry. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 568. Looks like we have an unexpected guest. Let me think, this is like the deer in the fables. Miss Magadol, you are most welcome. Marquis Yoakum smiled. The nun princess glared at him angrily, but most of her attention was on Archbishop Moros's hand. Her face was full of shock and fear, revealing the uneasiness in her heart. Moros turned around and asked, Archbishop, what do you plan to do with this beautiful lady? You'd better not have any ideas about her. This woman's identity is very complicated. You can't afford to offend her. Archbishop Moros replied with a straight face. Ha, you must be joking, Archbishop. Marquis Yoakum laughed. Women. I have a lot of them. Compared to those charming and gentle women who are as soft as water, I have never been interested in those thorny roses. The head ritual master glanced at him. He looked up and said coldly to Magadol, I will send you to Wood. He will understand the cause and effect of this matter. Before this matter is settled, he will supervise you on my behalf. Your Highness, please behave yourself. He emphasized, this is also for your safety. There will not be a next time, Princess Magadol. I don't need your pity, you despicable people. Magadol's face was pale. She clenched her teeth and refused. You are using the Holy Cathedral to intervene in the political affairs of other countries. The revered flame King Gretel's crown will fall because of you. After Ampere Seal, all of you will be sinners. Her eyes were about to spit fire. Moros was expressionless. The nun princess's words were like the highest judgment for a devout believer, but to him, it was not painful at all. The holy war is imminent. Erewhon's internal affairs are rotten. If we don't cleanse ourselves, it will only be a matter of time before thousands of people fall into a sea of fire. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Your Highness, your opinion is just a foolish woman's opinion. He refuted Magadol's words one by one. Then he raised the ring on his hand. Besides, isn't this the only thing you care about? You and I faced the trial naked in front of Martha, but I didn't feel any more ashamed than you did. In Moros's hand was an ordinary noble's ring made of silver. Under the candlelight, its surface was shrouded in a layer of faint light. The ring was carved with an olive branch and surrounded by a flame-like ruby in the center. The emblem on the ring was an olive branch, a flame and wind pattern and a crescent moon. It was the emblem of House Cipher. The nun princess trembled and her face turned even paler. Moros winked at Marquis Yoakum. Send her to Wood. If he asks, you can answer truthfully. That's secondary, but I really don't want to meet Archbishop Wood. I can see that he doesn't like me. Marquis Yoakum replied self-deprecatingly. Moros did not say a word, but he was mocking him in his heart. Magadol lowered her head, and her heart turned colder. Hearing what they said, Archbishop Wood already knew everything, but he did not say anything. Whether it's Moros or Archbishop Wood, they both represent the Holy Cathedral of Fire and Cruz. But they are definitely not Erewhon, my friend, or... She lowered her head in a daze and did not realize that Marquis Yoakum had come to her side. The latter smiled and was about to help her up. Magadol felt a wave of disgust. She waved her hand and said angrily, "I'll do it myself." But she did not expect a black object to fall from Marquis Yoakum's hand to the ground. It was a ring shaped like a snake. It represented the Ouroboros clan of All for One. The room was silent for a moment. The faces of the three people in the room changed at the same time. Magadol raised her head and looked at Moros and Marquis Yoakum in disbelief. Her mind was in a mess and many thoughts came one after another. But in the end they settled into one word: run. The nun princess's thoughts flashed like lightning, but her mind was clear. She immediately got up and ran. "Catch her." The archbishop's cold and emotionless voice came from behind her. It was as if an ice-cold sharp sword had pierced through the princess's back, causing her to shiver. Even her last bit of hope had been completely extinguished. They are really in cahoots. How could this be? Magadol felt her heart clench. She knew that if she was one step slower, she would not be spared. Moreover, this secret was too important. She had to tell the others. Archbishop Wood? Magadol suddenly felt a little scared. She was not sure if the person who was her teacher and friend was also involved in this. Another figure immediately appeared in her mind, a lord who was exceedingly young. But would it be in time? The nun princess's heart pounded and she could not help but look back. But when she looked back, time seemed to have stopped in front of her eyes. She first saw Marquis Yoakum looking at her with a slightly regretful expression, and then she saw the cold gleaming sword in his hand. No. Magadol felt her tears flowing uncontrollably. For the first time she realized that she did not want to die so badly. She still wanted to live, even if it was to return to her hometown and live a peaceful life. The sword pierced through her heart from behind. The princess felt as if she was struck by lightning, and then the pain spread. "I'm sorry, Griffine." Darkness gradually spread in front of her eyes. Inside the inner courtyard of the Anderla Cathedral, the rain fell like silver ribbons from the patio, washing away the trees in the courtyard. But in the midst of the bushes, the sound of two people talking could be heard. "Hey Jill. I say, isn't it a little too risky for us to do this? This is the temple. Think about it, those big shots only need to move their fingers to crush us like we're bugs." In an unknown place under the bushes, the ground suddenly shook and then the whole thing sank. It looked as if a hole had been opened in the mud, and the water and soil on the ground were pouring in. "Get out of the way. Keep your voice down. Ugh. I told you not to go out when it's raining, especially tonight. My new clothes are all wet. Look, it's all mud. It's all over." "Boo, you stole that dress," a voice reminded him kindly. "That's not the point. Besides, what's the difference between buying and stealing? In the end, people still have to pay for the stolen goods. Alright, let's change the topic. I'm saying that the tunnel you found is completely unreliable. At least, the person who designed it did not consider the possibility of water entering the tunnel. In my opinion, either his brain is as damaged as my clothes, or this is simply the work of a stupid thief." The voice paused for a moment. "Just like us. We're not thieves, we're bandits." "Come on, Jill, we're bandits," the first voice said lazily. "Once we're done with this, we'll be bandits." "Wait, someone's coming, shut up." A small head popped out from the hole under the bushes. It had to be said that the rain outside was very heavy, and in a short while the hair on the head was completely wet. However, the young man called Jill did not seem to notice. If you looked closely, you would see that he had a pair of surprisingly large emerald green eyes. That's right, this was a greater goblin. The goblins were the largest kind of creatures. If you did not pay special attention to their eyes, you would think that they were halflings, but they did not have hairy hands and feet. In any of Wone's stories, the goblins were a kind of beautiful creatures. Their distant relatives, the elves, were the embodiment of beauty. It had to be said that the greater goblins were the same. They were a very delicate and beautiful race, but unfortunately they did not have a good reputation. If the halflings who wandered the continent and did not have a fixed residence were lazy, then the greater goblins were simply a place for thieves. 9 out of 10 legends about them were related to the goblins. Of course, the goblins were certainly desirable, but the goblins in real life did not have such a good reputation. Jill and Boone were honorable members of the Brotherhood of Thieves and Ampere Seal. Of course, whether they were honorable or not was another matter, but they were definitely daring. Jill obtained a map by chance. In fact, it was a secret design of the underground passage of the Holy Sanctum. This was not an ordinary thing. If it was an ordinary person, they would definitely hide it well or burn it or quickly sell it for a good price to avoid getting into trouble. But Jill immediately had an idea that could be called the model of a thief. He decided to sneak into the Holy Sanctum and make a fortune. This was crazy. Of course, this was a matter of course for the greater goblins. In the ethics of the greater goblins, all the treasures in the world were ownerless, and those with virtue would obtain them. What kind of virtue was this? It was hard to say. Jill carefully poked his head out, using the only glimmer of light in the rainy night. The vision of the greater goblins was 100 times better than that of humans. In fact, even in the dark he could see clearly, but the pouring rain seriously interfered with his observation. It was not until the footsteps on the other side were very close that he shook his ears and heard that the other party was walking towards him. Shoo! He hurriedly turned around and gestured for his companions to keep quiet. Cloth's big mouth was famous in the Brotherhood of Thieves. There were several times where he had failed because of his big mouth. In Jill's opinion, if it were not for his talkative companion, the two of them would have spent at least half of the time in the prison in Amber Seal. Fortunately, this time Boone looked very obedient, perhaps because he was tidying up the mud on his new clothes. Jill's eyes quickly widened as he saw 3 people coming out of the darkness one after another. One of them seemed to be carrying something on his back. The 3 of them stopped at the other side of the courtyard, and then opened a cover from the ground. It was an exit on the other side of the secret passage. Jill had a good memory, or rather, it was the basic skill of a nightingale. In the rain, the person carrying the bag quickly put the thing down. Another person said, "This matter is too important. Let's leave it here first. When Wood leaves, I will find a way to send it out." "Will High Priest would be suspicious?" asked a muffled voice. The voice was very soft, and if it were not for Jill's sharp and long ears, he might not have heard this sentence clearly. "Don't worry, Magadal has been sneaking out of the Holy Cathedral these days. When the chaos tomorrow comes, others will naturally think that she went missing in the chaos." The 3 of them exchanged a few words in the rain, but Jill's heart was already burning. Martha above, the treasure they buried is actually related to the Archbishop. As a qualified citizen of Amber Seal, especially for those who knew the upper nobles like the back of their hands, they certainly knew what the name Wood represented. He did not even hear the last few words at all. When the 3 of them left, he climbed down and tugged at his companion, excitedly shouting, "Did you hear that, Boone? This time we are rich." "Yes," Boone replied unhappily, "I hope the trouble is not as big. Risk and benefit go hand in hand, my partner." To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 569. After passing through a series of intersecting tunnels filled with grain and water, Jill soon found the place where the 3 mysterious men had buried their treasure. In the narrow tunnel, a large bag lay quietly on the ground. Jill and Boo's eyes lit up. "Jill, shall we open it?" "Of course." The 2 of them untied the ropes in a flurry, but the first thing that was revealed from the cloth bag was not the dazzling treasure, but a young girl with a face as white as a sheet of paper and eyes tightly shut. The 2 of them screamed in unison and retreated as if they had seen a ghost. "Jill, this is not a treasure." "Of course I know." "Oh my God, this must be a murder." "Martha above, this happened right under her nose." "God is my witness, I didn't do anything." "Boo, quickly pull me up. I'm so scared that my legs are weak." "Jill, I'm the same. Not only are my legs weak, even my back is weak." Boo said with a long face. This was the first time he had seen a dead person. "Don't talk nonsense, Boo. How can your back be weak?" "It's true, Jill. It's so soft. I can even feel that the wall behind me has become soft." "Nonsense, how can the wall become soft?" "It's true. Besides, I said it was just an illusion." Boo replied angrily when he saw that his companions did not want to believe him. But before he could finish his sentence, a gentle voice spoke from behind him. "I think it's not an illusion. Just because you're leaning on my leg." "Ah!" Boo screamed in fright. He turned around and saw a young man wearing a black noble's attire and a long sword at his waist. He looked gentle and kind standing behind him. Both Boo and Jill jumped up at the same time. Meeting a noble in this godforsaken place was like a mouse meeting a cat. Both of them were stunned. This has nothing to do with us, we just met by chance, please don't take us to the port." I'm just saying, please don't accuse a good person." Jill trembled as she looked at the stranger who had appeared without a sound. Although he was daring, the punishment for murder in Amber Seal had always been severe. The punishment for murder was stripping Amber Seal of citizenship, confiscation of all family assets, and hanging. Of course, the most severe of all was the confiscation of all property, at least as far as Jill and Boo were concerned. This was simply a punishment straight to hell. The young man who appeared out of nowhere was naturally Brando. Since half of his soul came from the future, he naturally knew about the underground tunnel under the Holy Sanctum. The tunnel was designed and built together with the Anderla Sanctum by Roganin. The tunnel was originally designed as a fortification under the Sanctum, but the Sanctum later used it to do many shady things. The entrance and key to the underground tunnel should be in the hands of the Archbishop. Naturally, ordinary people would not be able to enter. Unfortunately, there was a quest in the Amber Sword that was related to this tunnel, so there was an extra entrance to this tunnel. This unknown entrance was connected to a sewer, and was one of the back doors left behind by Roganin. During the attack in defense of Ampere Seal, the players on Erwin's side used this secret entrance many times to repeatedly attack the Anderla Sanctum, which was under the control of Madara. Therefore, this secret tunnel was once known as the lifeline of the Sanctum. However, in this era, the descendant of the Roganin family who provided the quest should still be living in Grey Harbor, waiting for the call of fate. Brando had reason to believe that no one other than himself would know about this secret tunnel. Therefore, when he saw Jill and Boo, he was still surprised. He originally thought that Princess Magadol might also have the key to this tunnel. With her status, this princess had the opportunity to make a copy of the key. Although this was not in line with her identity, Brando could more or less guess this point from the confident attitude of this princess in front of him. However, he did not expect to meet a pair of greater fairies. He was very familiar with the greater fairies. It could be said that they were the hotbed of rogues. Many of the famous nightingales among the players were also from this race. When they appeared here, Brando immediately knew what they were here for. He was truly audacious. At this time, Freya walked out from behind Brando. The first thing she saw was of course the two noisy little guys. She could not help but be stunned. Brando, why are there two goblins? No, we are not goblins. We are fairies. Jill was furious. He could endure being hanged, but he absolutely could not tolerate being slandered as a goblin. Although in Wond, goblins and fairies were indeed big families of goblins, but fairies absolutely disdained to be associated with dirty goblins. In their view, goblins were all cavemen, or rather, cavemen were the ancestors of goblins. Fairies? Aren't fairies small? The future Valkyrie even gestured with her hand. She meant to say, aren't fairies only 1 or 2 inches tall? They even have beautiful wings. Those are forest fairies, we are greater fairies. Jill replied indignantly, but his tone could not help but be a little depressed. Just like how fairies looked at goblins, greater fairies were indeed a few levels lower in terms of bloodline compared to the forest fairies. I see, Freya nodded, but suddenly saw the bag on the back of the two greater fairies. Her face paled. Princess Magadol. Brando's expression also changed. Without waiting for Jill to speak, he separated the two and pressed his hand on Princess Antiburo's neck. Her body was cold but still soft, but he could no longer feel her pulse. Brando had learned first aid from Freya, so of course he knew what this meant. But he did not give up and called up a virtual screen to take a look. Suddenly his heart turned cold. A line of cold words appeared on the screen. Name, Magadol Armand Loder de Antiburo race. Gender, female status. Dead. The sword wound was in the heart, almost piercing through the chest. If a human received such an injury, even if they had 1 foot in the elemental realm, they would definitely die, not to mention Princess Magadol, who was just an ordinary person. Brando's hand trembled slightly and his face darkened. He had not interacted much with Princess Magadol, whether it was in this world or in the game. But this nun princess had left a very good impression on him. She was gentle, courteous, and did not have the usual bad habits of a noble lady. She was not old-fashioned and cold and even a little hospitable. The most commendable thing was that she did not pick up any bad habits in the circle of scheming nobles. Even in the darkest days of Erwin and the Holy Cathedral, she still maintained the purest of heart. People who were firm in their beliefs for the sake of friendship were few and far between, even in the more advanced modern society. Princess Antiburo may be a believer, but she believed in the true truth, the most glorious side of the human heart. Freya silently squatted down beside Brando. This was not the first person to be sacrificed in this political battle, but it was the person she was most familiar with. And the princess's best friend, who was usually kind and gentle, was now lying there coldly as a corpse. This kind of shock made her bite her lips tightly. Brando sighed and reached out to smooth the princess's messy hair, trying to make her look as peaceful as possible. Brando? The future goddess of war's voice trembled. It was not that she had never seen death, but she could not understand why people would kill each other to this extent. To the Holy Cathedral, wasn't the nun princess the most devout believer? Brando shook his head and his heart was filled with doubts. This result was also beyond his expectations. In his mind, even if Magadol was exposed, she would at most be put under house arrest. How could the other party do such a thing? How could they dare to do such a thing? The intensity of the other party's reaction was beyond his expectations. But he could not make sense of it at the moment, and his heart was in a mess. In the eyes of others, he was never a rational person who was cold to the point of indifference. This was the complete opposite of the nobles in this land. The nobles appreciated this kind of cold rationality, and even thought that it was an outstanding trait that a good lord should have. But he did not fit in with this trait. After a long time he finally came back to his senses. He turned around and stared coldly at Butt and Jill. Look at what you two have done. You have murdered a princess of another country on Erwin's land. Do you know how big of a mistake you have made? You may even start a war. I have to arrest and deport all of you. Only then will I be able to quell the anger of the neighboring countries. Brendel tried his best to make his tone sound cold and businesslike, even though his heart felt like it was suffocating. Jill and Butt, who were being stared coldly by Brando, were so scared that their faces turned green. Although they did not know what this young noble meant, it sounded very scary. War, quelling anger, the two of them could not help but tremble in fear. Especially when Freya, who was wearing Erwin's military uniform, was standing beside him. This made the threat even more convincing. Although Freya was wearing the uniform of the Imperial Guards, the two fairies could not tell the difference between the Imperial Guards and the soldiers of the Port Authority. In their eyes, Brendel was the terrifying god of death who wanted to capture them and bring them to justice. Of course, Freya knew that Magadol could not have been killed by the two of them. However, they might know something since they were here. She knew that Brando was using a trick to get information from them. Although she could not bear to see Jill and Butt trembling in fear, she could not help but harden her heart when she thought of Princess Magadol's tragic death. Butt and Jill were so scared that they could not speak until Brando added, "Of course, these punitive measures include confiscation of all your assets, including those that you buried in the forest outside the city." "No, how do you know?" Jill was scared silly. Every time the Port Authority confiscated all their loot, it was only a small part of it. This was because the fairies had a habit of burying their belongings. Their clan would usually choose an unknown and fixed place to bury their belongings. Usually, each clan would choose a place, and only the fairies themselves would know where the treasures of their clan were buried. However, Brando was an exception. No, I mean this has nothing to do with us, you can't do this." Jill and Butt panicked. If they were just scared silly before, this time they were really restless. Especially when they thought about the fact that their assets were still in jeopardy. "Nothing to do with you?" Brando raised his voice and asked coldly, "Then what are you doing here? Don't tell me you're here to steal?" "No, we're here to steal." But immediately confessed to his crime, and Jill was so anxious that he wanted to shut his mouth. "Very well." Brando said coldly, "According to the laws of Ampere Seal, stealing will also result in the confiscation of half of all your assets, and you will also have to spend a year in prison. You should know this, right?" "Oh no." But regretted it immediately. Although it was not all of their assets, half of it was enough for them to suffer. Especially since it was half of their real assets this time. But there's still a chance to make up for it. Brando changed the topic. "Now that you're involved in a murder case, if you can provide some useful clues, maybe I'll consider reducing your sentence." When Brando said this, it was as if he was a judge, but the two great fairies did not think about the legal procedures to become a judge, or whether it was legal to hear their theft case here. In short, in their opinion, a noble definitely had the right to beat and kill them. The two of them hurriedly nodded their heads. "Very well, tell me, how did you find her?" Brando asked. "Her? No, sir, we only found a pocket, we didn't know this. This princess was inside." Jill quickly replied. "A pocket?" "Yes." Jill hurriedly revealed everything that he had seen earlier, afraid that he would miss something and cause this Lord Judge to change his original intention in anger. It was conceivable that since the other party could reduce their sentence, he could naturally increase it as well, right? For a moment, Jill was impressed by his own cleverness. His green eyes spun quickly, and for a moment, he even recalled some details that he didn't notice before. "3 people? Can you imitate their tone?" "Brando?" Freya was slightly startled. She looked at Brando strangely, and felt that this request was a little excessive. To be honest, the tone and way of speaking between nobles were actually similar, and it was impossible to distinguish who was talking to each other from the other party, especially when one did not know who the other party was. But Brando shook his head slightly, indicating that there was no need for her to worry. He frowned slightly, and his thoughts were clearer than ever. Magadal's encounter had really angered him, and this time the people behind the scenes were destined to face his wrath. Ventriloquism was one of the basic skills of a burglar, and Jill was naturally proficient in it. He first imitated the tone of the first person, and Brando immediately understood. Moros. He muttered in his heart. Next. Yoakum. Next. I don't seem to know this guy, but he sounds like a soldier. The Coast Guard should not be on the same side as the Holy Cathedral, and Moros and Yoakum would not believe them, so he should be from one of the major legions. Count Videkin's confidant? Brando frowned. The question that Freya was worried about was actually not a problem for him. Ordinary people might not be able to tell, but that did not mean that he could not. Those who dared to attack Magadal were definitely not nobodies, but people with a strong background. There were only a few of these people in the whole of Erewhon, and they were all people that Brando was very familiar with. Their tone to him was very clear. Furthermore, the murder of Princess Magadal was something that even the Holy Cathedral would not be able to cover up. Therefore, the fewer people who knew, the better. The person who did it would definitely clean up the mess himself, and would not let others do it. And when he heard Jill's description, it confirmed his guess. It was indeed so. Brando's face revealed a cold smile, and his eyes were also filled with disdain. Freya looked at him and could not help but be slightly stunned. Brando, you know? She was a little surprised. Although Brando's ability had made her believe that there was nothing that he could not do, but this was a little too unbelievable. Was there really someone in this world who was born omniscient and omnipotent? This thought only existed in the future goddess of war's mind for a moment, but then she saw Princess Magadal's pale face, and her heart was filled with sorrow. She vaguely understood the reason for Brando's anger. Brando? She faintly called out sadly. But Brando patted her hand and whispered, Don't worry, Princess Magadal's matter can still be salvaged. But no matter what, this time I will definitely teach those people who are scheming in the dark an unforgettable lesson. The last few words were squeezed out through gritted teeth. Freya was stunned and could not help but look at her companion in disbelief. The princess she, Brando nodded seriously. This was not to comfort her, but because he suddenly remembered something. P.S. I went back to my hometown yesterday and today I will make up a 5,000-word chapter. I will try my best to stabilize it. Although I have been off for a long time, I still hope that everyone will continue to support me. I will naturally repay everyone with better quality, thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 570. Outside the window, silver lightning occasionally flashed across the dark sea, like a dazzling flame that lit up the sky. Brando sat silently by the bed. Not far away, Princess Magadal was lying on the bed. She was so quiet that she looked like a sleeping beauty in a fairy tale. After a while, Orthlis's voice sounded in his mind. Brando, you guessed right. This little girl is not human. She's not even a living being. Brando's tone was calm. So you've already guessed it? Her hoarse voice was slightly surprised. In the scripture of creation, the epic of the Cruz people, the Pale poem, it says, Mortal life was born from the water and multiplied on the earth. They were blessed by the wind and given wisdom by the fire. It also says that, at the beginning of creation, a noble kindness walked on the surface of the water and gave spirits to the small creatures that floated on the surface of the water. Thus life was formed. However, with light and darkness complementing each other, there was both positive and negative. Thus, the one above the gods decided that the end of life was the kingdom of the dead, where the dead would gather and be governed by a god, one. But beyond the boundary of life and death, there was a third camp, which was stone, metal and other things without souls. Note, the god of the dead, darkness under the light, the monarch of the realm of eternal death, Ko-Si. I didn't know you were so knowledgeable about the Pale poem. I roughly understand that in this era, there are very few people who can read the ancient scriptures. And in the era of the War of the Holy Saints, these scriptures and prophecies are tantamount to lighthouses in the darkness. Although he could not see, Brando could still feel Orthlis turning her head to look out the window. He could not help but look in the same direction. Above the stormy sea, a lighthouse stood tall. In the darkness, a beam of light pierced into the deep sea. It was like a sharp sword, and also seemed to be the only truth in this world that was subverted. The magic storm at the edge of the world of order was gathering, more or less affecting the civilized world. This year's storm in the outer seas of Ampere Seal was more ferocious than usual, but there were very few people who noticed this abnormality. The sailboats kept their sails and entered the harbor, waiting for the storm to subside before going out to sea for the first time. I have a close relationship with the mages in the tower. Lady Orthless, in a sense I'm half a mage. I'm interested in history. Not only the pale poem of the Cruise people, but I've even read some fragments of the Black Prophecy. Even though what you said makes sense, I still feel like you're hiding something from me, Orthless said with a faint smile. Brendel could feel the mischievous look in her eyes. Also, I really hope you can call me sister instead of Lady Orthless. I can't say that out loud. Brendel replied embarrassedly. Orthless chuckled. Since you are my student, it shouldn't be a problem for you to call me teacher, right? Brando called out respectfully. Orthless was not related to him, but she had given him a lot of help. She had even saved him more than once. This kind of care was like the care of a senior to a junior. Although Brando did not say it out loud, he was very grateful in his heart. Orthless laughed. Good. So, what do you plan to do next? Orthless was not the only one who asked this question. There were many people gathered in the room. Freya, who was standing beside the Roman, did not know that Brando was talking to a heroic spirit. But when she saw Brando's expression change, she quickly asked, "How is it, Brando?" It was only then that Brendel regained his senses. He looked at the others in the room. Sue, Amandina, the Shire, the Nightsong Tiger, Falerne, Tina, and the rest of the mercenaries of Lopez. Mephistopheles and Medisha were standing not far from the door. There was also the red-haired girl beside him who had not said a word. They were basically the core of his little group. Princess Magadol's wound went through her heart. I said that if it was a normal person it would be a fatal blow. Ah. Freya was stunned. She could not help but tremble as she pointed at Brando. Brando, you said. Brando could not help but laugh. I said that if it was a normal person, it would be a fatal blow. Oh, Brando, are you saying that this little girl is not a normal person? Out of everyone, the Roman reacted the fastest and immediately shouted. The others also reacted immediately and could not help but look at him suspiciously. Don't forget that you are also a little girl. Brando glared at Romaine, then nodded. I hope that you will not spread this news. Princess Magadol did not suffer a fatal blow because she is not a human. Not a human? Could it be that she is a half-elf like Princess Griffin? Freya asked in confusion. She could not help but look at the princess lying on the bed. Her ears were still the same as a normal person's. No, to be exact, she is not even considered a living being. Brando replied word by word. What? Everyone was startled. Brando was silent for a moment. In fact, it was hard for him to accept this fact at first. But when he checked the princess's injuries, he realized that something was wrong. First of all, when he opened the princess's status window, her name and other statuses were clear at a glance. Magadol's original name was Magadol Armand Loder de Antiburo. Armand Loder was her maternal family's surname, and Antiburo was her fief's name. The naming rules were completely in line with the local customs of Antiburo. At the same time, it was also in line with Brando's memory. For example, this name, as well as information like gender, were all known to Brando, which was why it was displayed in the status window. But there was one detail that caught his attention. Magadol's race was? This was very unusual. Logically speaking, Magadol was a human. Not to mention humans, it was very easy to tell the difference between common races. This was common knowledge, so in theory, it was impossible for him to not be able to tell. When he first saw Magadol's corpse, Brando's mind was in a mess, and he did not notice this detail. But when he looked back, he immediately felt that something was wrong. After carefully inspecting the princess's corpse, he immediately found another problem. The battlefield emergency told him that Princess Magadol had died at least 2 hours ago. However, after a few minutes of death, a person's muscles would begin to loosen, and their skin would change color and harden. This change would be quite obvious for the first hour, but there were no signs of it on the princess at that time. More importantly, although her skin was cold, it maintained a moderate amount of elasticity, as if she was in a healthy state. In Wound, most of the injuries and illnesses were cured by herbology and magic, so most people did not have the common knowledge of biology. But in Brando's eyes, these details were very unusual. So he quietly checked the princess's pupils and was shocked. In the state of death, Magadol's pupils were dim, as if the originally bright flame had been extinguished. It looked like the eyes of a dead person, but the pupils were not dilated, and most importantly, there was a trace of light in the depths of the eyes that seemed to have been extinguished. In Brando's memory, there was only one kind of existence that would show such signs after death. That was the radiance of the soul core, and there was only one type of life that needed to be driven by it, a puppet. At that time he almost screamed in fright. His first reaction was to wonder if this was a substitute of the princess, but then he realized that it was impossible, because he immediately found the silver ornament of the wind elves on the dead princess' body. This ornament was the one he had given to her at the auction in the afternoon. If this puppet was Princess Magadol's substitute, then there was no need for her to keep it, lest the matter of her meeting with Brando be exposed. Moreover, this Princess Antiburo might not be too exquisite as a puppet. Other than her pupils, there were no signs of life on her body. She was made of flesh and blood just like a normal person. Whether it was her intelligence, personality, or emotions, she was completely the same as a normal person. Brando found it hard to believe that the girl who had discussed with him how to help his best friend, who had a firm belief and a pure heart, was a puppet. But after Orthlis examined her carefully, she finally concluded that the princess was indeed a very special existence that was very different from normal life. To be more precise, it was a very special puppet. At least in Brando's experience, he had never seen such a strange life form. This princess was obviously not a soulless, rigid construct. Brando was more willing to admit that she was a very special race, and in fact Orthlis agreed with this point. In the memories of the Wind Elf, she had seen such an existence before. They were once puppets, but were later given intelligence and formed their own race. This race was the Rune Dwarfs. Since there were similar existences, then perhaps Magadol's existence was not that strange. But what Brando was curious about was her identity. Magadol was a princess of a duchy, and was not like him who existed out of thin air. He just did not know if her parents, the Duke and his wife, knew about this fact. If not, then it would be interesting. At least for now, it seemed that Magadol did not know about it, and she had always thought of herself as a human. Even in history, Brando had not heard of this at all. But he remembered something. It was rumored that the nun princess's life after marriage was very miserable, and she even disappeared in the end. Originally, it was just a rumor in the history of the nobles, but now it seemed to be a little strange. Brando shook his head and threw these messy thoughts out of his mind. He carefully explained his thoughts to the people around him. Of course, except for the last part, everyone could not help but widen their eyes. Wait, Brando, are you saying that Princess Magadol is a puppet? Not only Freya but even Amandina was a little stunned. But... No, in fact Her Highness is not a puppet, it's just a metaphor. Brando shook his head and explained, simply put, Princess Magadol's vital signs are different from what we know. She does not have blood circulation and is not a carbon-based life form, but a construct life form. But like us, she has her own soul. What is blood circulation and carbon-based life form? Is that a mage's vocabulary? Amandina asked, puzzled. Ahem. Brando immediately realized that he had misspoken, but with the difference in knowledge between him and these people, it was really difficult to explain. He could only cover it up and said, that's a professional term, just listen to it. In short, it's like the Rune Dwarves, right? Brando said it before, but was Uncle Odom really a puppet in the past? Roman could not help but ask curiously. This young lady's train of thought was always different from others. No, Brando replied unhappily, that was tens of thousands of years ago. If he was a puppet, it would be Odom's ancestor who was a puppet, it has nothing to do with him. But, Her Highness does not know anything about this. Could it be that Princess Magadol has been lying to Princess Griffin? Although she had only interacted with the future Princess Regent for a short period of time, Freya was already thinking about her. Brando's heart skipped a beat, and he immediately gave her a look and shook his head. No, I suspect that Princess Magadol herself does not know anything. She does not know anything? Freya was slightly stunned and wanted to ask more, but seeing Brando's look, she immediately shut her mouth. She immediately reacted. If Princess Magadol herself did not know anything, then there was a big problem. She thought for a moment and changed her words. Then how can we save her? To be exact, Princess Magadol is not dead at all. As for how to wake her up, I need to look up some information. But right now we have more important things to do. Brando looked out of the window. There was almost no light between the sea and the sky, but the hourglass had reached the end of its journey, and the most important day in the history of Ampere Seal was about to arrive. But when it came to it, he was a little hesitant. What made Marquis Joachim and the others kill a princess and a high-ranking priest of the Holy Cathedral? This was too important. What did Princess Magadol see in the end? The originally clear history seemed to be darkening, as if a huge vortex was forming in front of him. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 571. The star of the other side had already risen in the night sky. The howling winds and layers of dark clouds could not cover its brilliance. That was Martha's main star, the symbol of order and wisdom. It was already early in the morning, and there was a glimmer of light under the dark sea. Brando silently raised his head and looked at the horizon, silently calculating the time. There were 3 hours before the next sunrise. 3 o'clock in the morning. Under the coastal waters of Amberlight, a few imperceptible figures appeared. Their vertical fins were like blades that split the surface of the water, drawing white traces on the surface of the sea. Sani quietly came to Brando's side. This male Naga watched the Naga army pass through the bay in the storm. He could not help but raise his green-gray fins and stand proudly against the wind and rain. This is a warrior of my race. He turned his head and looked at Brando with his prismatic eyes. Brando was silent, but there was only a fire burning in his heart. Finally this day had arrived. After half a year of painstaking planning, after going through untold hardships, history had finally returned to its original point at this moment. What the future held was still unknown, but he had already thrown away everything in his heart. If he won, then this future that was on the verge of destruction would finally be dragged away from its original track of history. Her Royal Highness, the Valkyrie, and even the little Roman, anyone and their beliefs that were attached to this ship could continue to exist. If he lost, Brando pursed his lips and looked forward, his eyes were filled with darkness. In the darkness, the lightning that tore the sky and the sea apart was like the blazing flames that burned above Erewhon in the past. His eyes were also burning with raging flames. Brando looked back at Sani, and this male Naga could not help but lean back. Its heart was slightly suffocated. This kind of determination and will, it had only seen in the eyes of Her Royal Highness, and a person with such determination would eventually set off a storm on the sea. The half-elf girl also retracted her gaze from the dark sky. The layers of dark clouds did not seem to be able to block her gaze. Behind her, the stars on the other side were slowly rising. Martha was announcing the arrival of dawn to the world. The sky was about to brighten. She turned around and saw Makarov, Fleetwood, Count Bar, Oberway and the other ministers. It was as if the royal faction had never been divided. Nothing had changed. She felt a little absent-minded, as if history had not changed and the wheels were rolling forward. She could finally unify the whole of Erewhon with the help of these people, but there was still darkness ahead. Your Highness, please get in the carriage. Griffin turned around and looked at her mentor for the last time. Fleetwood's eyes were filled with shame. She turned around in disappointment. It would be great if they could be so stubborn. The carriage stopped in the rain, pitch black like a coffin. The princess opened the door, raised her head, and walked into the carriage like a real member of the Erewhon royal family. Cunning fox, Makarov leaped onto his horse. Even though he was a noble, he had spent his entire life in the military. His back was as straight as a javelin. Everyone's attention was focused on him as he pulled out his sword and pointed forward. Let's go. The sound of hooves could be heard as the Royal Knight Regiment began to gather beside the carriage. Everyone was wearing a cloak as they moved forward silently in the rain. The black troop meandered through the forest. Freya tilted her head to listen to the uniform galloping of the horses. She was tired after a sleepless night. She turned her head back, and the silent Knight of the Lake was just a shoulder behind her. Mr. Knight. Today I might have to use it to kill someone. The other party is also a member of Erewhon, and even a comrade from yesterday. I might have brought shame to the Lionheart sword. I'm sorry. The sword will never be shamed by killing. He replied coldly. It was the first time he had spoken in a few days. Freya turned around in surprise. Sword shall walk through thorns, the teachings of the sages. The Knight of the Lake replied proudly. After that, there was silence. In front of everyone was the stormy port of Amberlight. Her Highness has set off. Carglass read the note in his hand and immediately turned to look at his lord. Although his voice was deliberately calm, it was difficult to suppress the fire in his eyes. My lord. I know. Brando nodded. Everyone's eyes fell on him. It was already dawn, and the dark sea in the distance seemed to be undergoing a great change. A white line had already broken out of its cocoon. The White Lion Legion, Brendel said, taking a deep breath. Yes. The young people roared. After experiencing the hardships of the Black Forest, the storm before them was insignificant. Instead, the strength of the enemy in front of them aroused the unyielding spirit in their hearts. Young people could not compromise and no one cared whether this battle was right or wrong. The only thing that mattered was this battle. This day would be written into the pages of history. The royal faction has set off. Almost at the same time that Brando received the news, the same news was sent to the Holy Cathedral. Watching the messenger soldier leave, Archbishop Moros looked back with a gloomy face. Marquis Yoakum and Baron Buckland, who were hidden in the shadows, quickly bowed their heads respectfully. History is rewritten. Moros replied quietly. Order the White Lion Legion to enter the city. At the same time, countless messages were sent through various channels to every corner of Amberlight. The port, which had been silent for too long in the storm, was now like a giant beast that had awakened and begun to stretch its claws and fangs. At 5 o'clock in the morning, the gate of the Coast Guard cavalry camp opened, and the patrolling cavalry poured out. At 5:20 o'clock, the city was under martial law. Half an hour later, the port of Amberlight officially announced the start of storm season. The port was sealed. Ready, get ready. Sets of standard armor were unloaded from the ship. The oilskin bags were opened and dismantled. Then dozens of young officers of the White Lion Legion began to put on the armor. They had tried it on once or twice, but most of the time they could only wear the training armor. But just trying it on once or twice was enough for everyone to understand the power of this armor. This set of armor was the real White Lion battle armor, and it was restored after consulting Brendel and Orthlis's opinions. It was even stronger than the original. These young people from Tonajul might not understand what this meant, but just a set of magic armor was enough to make everyone gasp. Even Grodin would not be willing to equip his personal knight with a set of magic armor. The price of a few sets of magic armor was enough to buy a rich piece of land. The new White Lion armor looked a bit like the Maximilian armor from another world, the pinnacle of armor from the medieval era. However, there was no leg armor, and the armor skirt was distributed in sheets. The helmet was still the traditional full-face helmet of the Wind Elves. The most distinctive feature was the White Lion armor on the right shoulder. This design had long been removed from Erwin's White Lion armor, but in Brando's hands, it returned to the land of Wond. The inspiration for this armor came from Brando. Only the unique soul in his body could create an aesthetic that transcended the world and even the era. It was an aesthetic that came from another world. But it had to be said that art was universal. The new White Lion armor had a kind of beauty that moved people's hearts. When it was put together, it was full of tension that took one's breath away. Such a straightforward expression was very rare in this era of Erwin. Craftsmen were also artists. Brando's designs even made master craftsmen and Orthlis shine with splendor. In the end, they could only attribute this seemingly innate talent to the word freak. Soon the White Lion Legion was ready. All the young officers gathered and stood neatly in front of Brando, waiting for the inspection. At this moment, not only did Brando hold his breath, even the Shire could not help but be stunned. The priestess from Tonajul, Maria and Amandina looked at each other. Heavens, isn't this the legendary White Lion Legion? It's exactly the same as the records. The Shire shook his head in amazement. He was also present when the armor was designed, but he did not expect to see such an effect after wearing it. Even though I've never seen the White Lion Legion before, I really wish I was born in King Eric's era. The Nightsong Tiger could not help but nod in admiration. The White Lion Legion had been reborn. Only Brando and Orthlis knew that this was the real White Lion Legion. The elites that Erwin had eliminated from history had now returned, as if they were carrying the will of the late king to save this fallen kingdom. With the sword in hand, was it time for the oath to be reborn? My lord, please inspect the armor. Cargly's eyes shone brightly as he spoke. Brando smiled slightly. In this world, the White Lion armor was a proper light infantry armor. To be more precise, it was a cavalry armor. Due to the different weight, cavalry armor usually had much higher defense than infantry armor. But only the White Lion armor broke through this limit. Its biggest feature was that it inherited the magical properties of the half-plate wind armor. The core of the armor was the reduction in weight. But not only that, even though the wind was gentle, it also had a violent side. The power of the wind on the White Lion armor complemented each other. It was one of the most perfect armors in history. Otherwise, the White Lion infantry would not have been known as the cavalry of the earth. The king led the knight to unify the south. There was only one knight with a sword. It was almost time. Brando turned around. A carriage came through the thin curtain of rain. The family emblem of a broken sword on the wall of the carriage seemed to have traveled through history. The carriage stopped not far away and the door opened. Inside the carriage was the calm face of the countess who came out of Yenbao. Mr. Brando, the family of the Sword Protector, is a man of his word. His descendants have never forgotten the oath before the sword. Now, I hope to invite you to travel with me for the last time. Will you do me the honor? Her quiet voice penetrated the sound of the wind and rain. It would be my pleasure. Brendel replied with a smile. He turned around. Carglass, I'll leave this to you. White Lion Legion, follow the original plan and cooperate with Sani. Don't let me down, Carglass nodded solemnly. Brando turned around again. Teacher, I'll have to trouble you. The Ash Sword Saint nodded and took the reins of a war horse from a young man who came out from behind the house. His gray eyes glanced at Brando before he mounted the horse. The Shire, Scarlet, and Mephistopheles also mounted behind him. Endrique. What is it? I know you won't ride in the rain. Come with me. Brando waved his hand and turned around to walk towards the carriage. The vampire princess snorted softly. But at this moment, a small voice called out to them from behind. Brando. Brando turned around and saw Romaine in the crowd. Don't forget the promise. Romaine shouted with all her might, but I'll support you. You know that. Brando suddenly felt like he had returned to that night in Bucci in the summer. That night, the stars were still as bright as ever. The river of stars in the sky was like a link that connected the fates of him, Roman, and Freya. It's a promise, Brando smiled at her, we'll become great merchants. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to vote for it at Chidien. Come. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 572. Thousands of soldiers marched forward in silence in the rain. They moved in unison without a single noise. Everywhere they looked, everything was gray. Their armor, helmet tassels, and cloaks complemented each other. Who are they? The veterans on the tower looked down at the fortress in awe. They looked at each other in dismay. This army was obviously a strong one, and the most difficult opponent to deal with on the battlefield. But Awin still had such a strong army. Did they come from Fort Korkaz? Or did they come from the snowy battlefield on the northern plateau? Until a flag pierced through the darkness. On the flag, the emblem of a single-horned white lion had been there for hundreds of years. It carried the most glorious history of this ancient kingdom, shining brightly. I'm afraid they are not ordinary people, the captain beside him muttered to himself. He turned around and said, It's the White Lion Legion. The White Lion Legion has arrived. Open the gate. Open the gate. Open the gate. The sentinel's command was transmitted from the towering city wall, intermittently passing through the curtain of rain. The huge wooden door pushed open the muddy water and slowly opened with the low and heavy creaking of the capstan. The marching troops stopped. Owen looked up and stared at the gray walls of the ancient fortress. This was the center of the southern part of the kingdom that they had been guarding. This city was built by the late King Eric. Its glory was written on its walls. From now on, Erwin was no longer under the control of the Cruz people. This wall had been weathered and baptized by the flames of war, but it had never fallen into the hands of the enemy. This time it was going to cleanse itself. White Lion Legion entered the city. Before daybreak, Madeline dragged the newcomer to the quay. It was dark outside the port, but the waves were so huge that the sea seemed to be overturned. The storm swept across the entire outer sea. Beyond the chain, the sea was boiling, and a line of white broken waves was clearly visible under the headland lighthouse. He had never seen such violent weather in the past 10 years. Damn it, the waves are so big. Madeline praised in the wind and rain. He had been a port guard for 12 years and could be considered experienced and knowledgeable, but he had never seen such a spectacular scene. I have never seen such a storm since I was young. The old witch in Sea Breeze Cape said that the dark dragon has been resurrected. What we see now is an omen. The new recruit said with a pale face as he watched a small sailboat being dragged into the open sea from the anchorage. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared into the huge whirlpool. He couldn't help but tremble as he spoke. Cut the crap. I can't drown you. Madeline kicked him. Let's get to work. Stop procrastinating. He looked up and could not help but shake his head. But this year is indeed unusual. Ah. What now? Captain, there seems to be something in the sea. Are you seeing things? They're probably sailors who fell overboard. May Martha bless them and pray for their own good fortune. Madeline shook his head. Falling into the water at this time of the year, it would be a miracle to survive. Madeline did not know where this unlucky person came from. Perhaps it was someone from the previous boat. No, it's a shark. There are a lot of sharks in the sea. The new recruit suddenly screamed as if he had seen a ghost. Sharks? Madeline was stunned and could not help but turn his head. On the surface of the sea, there was a white wave with an erect fin that looked like a flag. Then a second wave, a third wave, dozens of white waves passed through the huge waves, forming a huge assault arrowhead that pointed straight at the dock. Then a second and a third arrowhead appeared. Almost in the blink of an eye, the entire port of Amberlight was facing the attack at the same time. On the surface of the sea, hundreds of thousands of waves were accelerating, like a huge pack of wolves rushing over. Madeline's face suddenly changed. That's not a shark. It's an enemy attack. He only felt his legs go weak. He staggered and turned around, wanting to rush to the alarm bell on the dock. But just as he turned around, he hit a solid wall with a bang. The old port guard only felt his vision go black. He could not help but look up in fear. What he saw was a humanoid, snake-shaped monster with a cold, angular face that resembled a lizard's. Naga? Madeline's eyes were filled with disbelief as he slowly fell to the ground. Sani retracted his hand and looked coldly at the two guards who had fainted on the ground. He had seen the weakness of humans before. But such a weak race also had impressive strong people. He turned around and looked at the sea. It was like a magnificent picture with a violent storm as the background, and under this picture, countless Nagas were landing. In the blink of an eye, the dock and the trestle bridge had been declared the change of hands. Amberlight's 7 docks, 1 backup dock and 2 military docks, were attacked at the same time. The port guards were unable to resist and were defeated in an instant. Dock number 3 has fallen. Dock number 4 has fallen. Sir, they are setting fire to the ships. How is this possible? Kinoan was almost screaming at his subordinates. In fact, he did not need to report to know the situation at the port. Outside the window there was a storm, but in the direction of the dock, there was a blazing fire. Are you all useless? Come on, tell me who is attacking us. Sir, it's the Nagas. Greyfin Nagas. Nagas? The deputy director of the port almost threw the ink bottle on the desk. You can't even defeat a group of bandits? No, sir. But there are too many of them. The adjutant quickly explained. Too many? 100? 1,000? Kinoan was furious. Although the Greyfin Nagas often attacked merchant ships on the sea route, they almost never attacked the port. His first reaction was that his subordinates were trying to shirk the responsibility. This was the most common thing they did. No, sir, 1,000, tens of thousands. The adjutant could not believe it, but he forced himself to answer. But this time, Kinoan didn't get angry because everyone heard a cry of surprise. Oh my God! Everyone turned their heads. Amidst the raging sea waves, a huge shadow suddenly appeared. The monster was so huge that it was like a floating mountain that suddenly appeared in everyone's field of vision. Demon whale. Kinoan slumped in his seat. His mind was in a mess, but there was only one thought in his mind. He could not be the director of the port anymore. I don't want it anymore. What the hell is going on? The port is under attack. Requesting backup? The commander of the patrolling cavalry regiment, Sir Zenopa Lee, took the order and looked at the messenger suspiciously. He pondered for a moment and raised his head. The sky in the direction of the port was half red. Even an idiot would know what was going on. Sir? He shook his head. His gaze became deep, as if his mind was trying to penetrate the heavy rain. The surrounding cavalry turned around and waited for their commander's orders. We have a more important mission, Sir Zenopa replied. But what about the port? Let Kinoan take care of it himself. Are the people of Amberlight feeding them a bunch of good-for-nothings? If he can't handle it, let him complain to the parliament himself. Zenopa snorted and added, the Greyfin Nagas are taking advantage of the situation. They will get what they deserve in the future. However, before he could finish his sentence, another messenger stumbled into everyone's field of vision from afar. Before he arrived, his voice was heard. Sir, it's not good. The Nagas have begun to attack the city. What? Zenopa's face changed. That's impossible. Are those bandits crazy? This is no longer a robbery. Martha Buff. They are declaring war. The Greyfin Nagas were declaring war. They were participating in this civil war. Onward, onward. The storm is protecting the people of Manas. Let them be fearless. On the dock of the First Army of Amberlight, Sani watched all of this coldly. He raised a blue trident and pointed it forward. Behind him, thunder and lightning flashed. In front of him, a torrent of water surged. Her Majesty the Queen has ordered the Greyfin Nagas to attack the inner city of Amberlight. Meet up with our allies on land. May the sacred covenant be unbreakable. Let us fight together again. Attack. The emblem of the heavenly snake Manus could be clearly seen on the tip of the trident. If Brando was here, he would definitely recognize it as the most precious treasure of the Greyfin Nagas, the scepter of the sea god. Sir Xenopoli's face was as cold as iron. He turned around and raised his sword. Patrol cavalry, listen to my orders. Your enemies today are those who are plotting to divide the kingdom. Follow me and attack the Greyfin Nagas. Erwin. Long live. Long live. The storm raged. The sword was pointed forward. In the sound of the wind and rain, people and horses neighed. On the square, large groups of cavalry were quickly turning around. In the blink of an eye, the patrol cavalry had split up. The patrol cavalry is moving. He really did have plans. Count Audine put down his brass binoculars. He stood together with a stranger in a straw raincoat. The fat noble was still following behind him. They had all gone through the test of life and death in the Black Forest. At this moment, the relationship between them was much stronger than before. Behind them, there were hundreds of silent noble private soldiers. In the pouring rain, everyone was solemn. The Count turned around. Master Ludio. The mysterious man in the straw raincoat nodded. I have received news from the Loop of Sky. I don't know what happened to the Loop of Trade Winds, but I hope they are doing the right thing. Whether it is right or wrong, we have to try it for ourselves. Audine's gaze pierced through the rain. Between the sea and the sky, the silver raindrops formed a straight line. Besides, I have confidence in that person. It has nothing to do with confidence. To me, this is an order. The man in the straw raincoat shook his head. He raised his hand. There was a ring on his hand. The ring was as green as a dream, and the emerald on it had formed a tree shape. Crash. A series of soft sounds could be heard. Everyone could not help but turn around. A few miles away from Ampere Seal was the Frata Forest. The forest canopy stretched for thousands of miles. They could only see a black mass of birds of prey soaring into the sky. In a moment they covered the sky. In the blink of an eye, they were like a black cloud pressing down on the port of Ampere Seal. The guards at the south gate of the port of Ampere Seal felt that today was the end of the world. Everyone could not help but turn pale and stare blankly at the scene. Countless, uncountable birds were flying straight towards the city. Martha above, what the hell is going on? And from a bird's eye view, the ancient port seemed to be caught in a terrible torrent. The torrent was raging. Above the clouds, a huge black shadow disappeared in a flash. A pair of golden eyes blinked and could not help but exclaim in admiration. How interesting, little guy. P.S. Come, let us burn to ashes together. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 573. Even in the most chaotic world, there was a quiet corner. The light in the small room flickered. The merchant girl was lying on the edge of the wooden bed, resting her chin on her crossed hands. Her eyes darted around curiously, guarding the nun princess who seemed to be in a deep sleep. Occasionally she would poke the nun princess with her finger. Amandina, why do you think Miss Magadol is a puppet? Look at her soft skin, it's so fun. She's so pretty too. Brando must be lying, right? Amandina sighed. Those familiar with the little Roman's personality would know that she meant fun, and not the second half of the sentence. Amandina was holding a book of Rockefeller's selected poems, but her mind was not on it at all. She had already flown into the rain. On the battlefield, swords flashed, the two sides slaughtered each other. This day would be written in the history of the port. But the next day the sun would shine on that side of the land. Could they really win? Amandina's heart was hanging in mid-air. She put down the book, silently took off her silver-rimmed glasses and looked out. The direction of the port was a sea of red. There seemed to be sobbing in the wind and rain, as if Erwin's spirit was crying in the air. But the intermittent wailing before death, she did not know if it belonged to her family or friends. Be careful, don't be too rude to Princess Magadol. You're already being too rude. Amandina looked at the little Roman sneakily pressing on the nun princess's almost perfect chest, and could not help but scold her in exasperation. I know, she replied matter-of-factly. Amandina glared at her. Amandina restrained herself. Yes, are you going out? Yes, it's too stuffy in the room, it's making me restless. Amandina looked at the nun princess on the bed with some jealousy. Also, if Princess Magadol suddenly wakes up, don't tell her anything. But Brando said she won't wake up for a while. I mean if. The Roman watched Amandina leave the room. She turned back, but for a moment she seemed to see the girl's eyelids move slightly. About a few seconds later, it moved slightly again. This time she saw it clearly. The merchant girl immediately turned around and shouted, but stopped herself. This was all thanks to the Roman. It was better to wait for a while. As she thought this, she turned her head back. She carefully looked at the nun princess on the bed. The nun princess Magadol seemed to have fallen into some kind of nightmare. Her brows were slightly furrowed, and she seemed to be very tired. She struggled slightly and some soft sounds came from her mouth. Roman was immediately curious. She leaned forward and carefully put her ear next to his mouth. Finally she heard a few words clearly. How could this be? Be careful. Be careful? Romain stood up and thought, seriously, for a moment before placing a finger on Magadol's forehead. Miss Magadol, are you dreaming? Let the little Roman help you calm your nightmares. A faint light flashed in the room. The heavy rain created a hazy world in the plaza outside the Anderla Cathedral. The black carriages passed through the curtain of rain, silently stopping in front of the main entrance of the cathedral. The emblems on the carriages shone for a moment. Vitokin of the Pale Lone Wolf, Arek of the Mountains and Eagle, Kirkoberg of the Crescent Lily, Cipher of the Flowing Wind and Flaming Moon, Grimoires of the Long Sword and Black Pine, and Karsuk of the Black Tower. The broken sword of Yenbao also dimmed slightly. When Arek got off the carriage, his expression was indifferent. Devard the Eagle and Sylvia the Silver Knight stood beside him. He raised his head, and Duke Cipher, who was not far away, responded with a slight smile. However, the red-haired man in the Cipher royal family's entourage was like a crane in a flock of chickens. Flaming Nicholas, the sword master of the Cipher royal family, elemental realm. His strength is above Devard and the Silver Knight. Brando's gaze shifted to another person. The old man in the purple robe, the mentor of the eldest son of the king, the eccentric Garlock. Archmage Cruz, his strength is on par with Fleetwood. The old man beside Count Vitokin, the veteran general of the Black Blade Squad, is Nigel, known as the Unshakable Sword. Although he is not a sword master, his strength is close to elemental activation. Most people think that he is in the elemental activation realm. Vitokin was his attendant when he was young. In addition, Vitokin himself has the strength of an upper gold rank. Brando looked around and found that the head of the White Lion Legion, Marquis Balta, and Admiral Count Janalesu were not there. He could not help but frown slightly. But even so, the scene was full of elites. Including the head of the Highland Knight Regiment, Erwin's elemental realm powerhouses were almost all gathered here. Those below gold rank were as numerous as the hairs on a cow. The power of a country was undoubtedly displayed here. And what kind of scene the Cruz Empire was like, except for Brando, perhaps no one present could imagine. You know them all? Dilfrey could not help but ask curiously. Just once, Brando replied. As he answered, everyone entered the Holy Temple. It was still the Roxby Palace. This was a place that was destined to leave a deep mark in history. Before Brando and Dilfrey entered this magnificent palace built in the 277th year of the First Era, he could not help but raise his head slightly and look up. On the arched beam, the murals of the final battle where the Flame King expelled the Myrna people were vividly colored. The famous Holy Sword was dazzling. It was just that the sages of the past were determined to sweep away all darkness, but would their descendants have such courage? I'm afraid not. The main hall was silent. Out of the ordinary, Bishop Moros was the first to enter the Holy Temple. He looked around and did not say a word. Two high-ranking priests followed him to the center of the hall. Everyone was stunned. Something big happened. Brando raised his head and narrowed his eyes, but he saw Arek's expressionless face and Duke Cipher's fearless smile as he stared at his niece opposite him. Princess Griffine's face was calm, but the people of the royal faction beside her looked solemn. It was obvious that there was a rift between the two sides. Moros paused for a moment, and there was no trace of joy or anger on his gloomy face. He slowly raised his head. Martha above must be gratified by her people's yearning and pursuit of peace, because whether it is the people of Cruz or the people of Erwin, at least it proves that the descendants of the Flame King still adhere to justice. However, he changed the topic and his expression turned cold. Ampere Seal is now shrouded in darkness. The Holy Temple is incompetent, and the people of the Holy Temple are rampant in this place. Before coming here, I received news that some of you are colluding with the Sheephead cult. But I don't want to believe that the glorious nobles of Erwin have fallen to this extent. I hope that before the meeting begins, someone can stand up and prove their innocence. Archbishop Moros's words caused an uproar in the hall. For a moment, the hall could not help but resound with the buzzing of discussions. Everyone looked around curiously, as if they were trying to find the hidden traitor among the nobles. Only Brendel looked coldly at Duke Cypher, Joachim, and Vitokin in the north with a smug look on their faces. Only Erek looked indifferent, as if it had nothing to do with him and he didn't care at all. The north was already a monolithic block. Brando turned his head and found that the Green Knight in the south was still not moving, as if they were waiting to see what would happen. Only Makarov had a look of disdain, while Fleetwood's face was as cold as water. Despicable. Brando heard Countess Griffin scold softly. Mr. Makarov, you know who I'm talking about. Moroz's gaze suddenly turned to the people of the royal faction. Someone in the crowd exclaimed as if they had just expected something. Nonsense. Makarov's face was cold. He secretly frowned. The Holy Temple had acted earlier than expected, and this made him feel a little passive. However, the other party was pressing on step by step. Could it be that they were ready for war? The Black Blade Squad had not advanced to the front line of the Grey Mountain, and only a vanguard had reached Ampere Seal. What made the other party so fearless? I also know that this is nonsense, but since it is nonsense, I hope Mr. Makarov can expose this lie and give us the truth. We must know that the nobles of Erewhon cannot be slandered. Moros replied calmly. All right, even if it's not necessary, it's just a small matter, Makarov replied coldly, but before I prove myself, do you have any proof for your words? Of course. To be exact, what I have is not evidence, but a witness. Moros added. There was an uproar. Brando also raised his eyebrows slightly. There was a traitor in the royal faction. He immediately thought. As expected, Makarov and the others immediately turned around in shock and anger. The royal faction and the old nobles had been fighting for many years, but there had never been a traitor. It was not only Makarov. Everyone present was shocked. Almost everyone in the royal faction was a hero of their time, and there was even a rumor that there were only those who died in battle, and no one who surrendered. Who would betray the royal faction? Everyone could not help but look at the royal faction in the south. But just as they looked over, someone walked out from behind Moros. It was him. Brando was shocked but also shocked. Viscount Benninger. The half-elf princess suddenly stood up and looked at the young man in front of her as if she had never met him before. Her expression was calm, but her clenched and trembling fists said everything. Where? My brother. Her Royal Highness took a deep breath and gritted her teeth as she asked. But Benninger only glanced at her and did not care about the gloomy Makarov at the side. He raised his head and looked at everyone. Everyone knows that I once admired the princess and even betrayed my family. But even so, I cannot allow the royal faction to be in cahoots with the cultists, and I do not want to see the princess fall into it. Every word was said, and the hall was silent for a moment. Everyone present had already guessed what was going on, but they could not help but feel lucky that they did not provoke House Cypher. It was too vicious. Brendel pursed his lips. There was no mention of this Viscount betraying the royal faction in the slightest. Instead, he was praised for his loyal pursuit of love. This person was really good at hiding his emotions. His heart was filled with shock, but there was also an inexplicable sense of relief. At least the royal faction was stabbed in the back. It was better than being stabbed in the back, wasn't it? But this was a big problem. If he remembered correctly, the little prince was taken away by the royal faction. This was going to be troublesome. And there was even more trouble to come. He suddenly saw Benninger turning towards him. What was this guy doing? Count Benninger, this Mr. Brando beside you, I'm afraid he's not your aide? While Brendel's thoughts were running through his mind, Benninger spoke to Dilfrey coldly. What are you waiting for? Dilfrey was stunned. She never thought that the battlefield would come to her so quickly. According to Brando, they were supposed to help the princess leave Ampere Seal. This was also the mission of the Swordkeeper family. Instead of facing these messy questions head-on, Benninger did not expect her to answer. It was enough to make her look surprised. He continued to ask aggressively, Mr. Brando, the earliest news I have is that you came from Bucci, and claimed to be a Highland knight. Then you rebelled in Tonagel, killed the local lord and gathered people to rebel. And the other truth is that your real identity is a sheephead disciple, and you are involved with All for One. And now you are conspiring with the royal faction to seize the power of this kingdom. Am I wrong? The Viscount raised his chin slightly. Whether it's true or not, you don't have to answer. We just need to ask the noble knights from Karsuk, whether you are the descendant of the so-called Highland Knight, where did your noble identity come from, and the truth will be revealed. Brendel furrowed his brows. The other party came prepared. Although he wasn't afraid of being exposed, his identity as a rebel was going to be confirmed after today. But he could not help but turn around and look at the real knights from the mountains and highlands. After being a pirate for more than a year, it was inevitable that he would feel anxious when he saw the real deal. Benninger smiled confidently and turned to the leader of the Highland Knights. "Dear leader, rumor has it that you always keep your promises and abide by the creed of the knight. We believe that you will never lie, so why don't you tell us the truth?" Benninger was good with words, and the leader of the Highland Knights smiled. He was indeed an old-fashioned knight. The Highland Knights were passed down from his family, and the knight's spirit was almost ingrained in his bones. The leader raised his head. From afar he looked like an ordinary middle-aged man, but Brando happened to know this man named Bun-Eyed Norbert. When the man's eyes fell on him, he could not help but feel guilty. The title of Steel Knight was not given out of nowhere. This seemingly easygoing uncle had a great reputation in Karsuk. The number of Madara's generals that died in his hands was in the double digits, both in history and now. It was also because of him that Madara did not have much of an advantage in Karsuk during the First War of the Black Rose. The middle-aged man smiled back at Brendel, but his gaze shifted to the area behind Brendel. "The Shire, is it you?" he asked seriously. Wow, there was an uproar in the hall. P.S. Where is the truth? To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 574. 6 o'clock in the morning. The Black Blade Squad's vanguard camp. The shrill magic alarm swept through the entire camp in an instant, like a landslide or a tsunami. The black-armored knight was fully armed. He rushed out of the resting area with clanking accessories hanging from his body and went straight to his mount. Many flying dragons were spreading their wings. Viscount Kustar Bowman put down his binoculars. The sky in the south was dark. Countless raptors shuttled back and forth between the thunder and lightning. It was like the end of the world. It's the Druids. The Southerners are at their wits' end. He was silent. He flipped onto the saddle, held the nearly 5-meter-long dragon spear in one hand, and raised his left hand high. The sound of a tsunami seemed to erupt from the camp in an instant. Black Blade Squad, 1st Dragon Cavalry Brigade. Let's go. Let's go. One by one, the giant beasts rose into the air. Their outstretched wings covered the sky. The logisticians on the ground watched their knight rise into the air. It seemed that in the blink of an eye, a huge battle formation had been formed in the sky. Dalit, don't drop the ball at the crucial moment. The ground crew shouted to the sky. Screw you. The knight in the sky scolded. The young man looked up. In front of him, under the rain clouds, thunder and lightning were surging. Tens of thousands of raptors rushed toward him. It's the Arrow Eagles. Watch out. They're accelerating. The voice above shouted. Everyone joined the battle formation. A serious voice came from the magic crystal. Roger, back to the team. The first attack group is expected to arrive in 30 seconds. 20 seconds. Dalit looked up. His eyes were full of fanaticism. The Black Blade Squad had been on standby for a long time. At this moment, everyone could only feel the blood in their body boiling. Viscount Kustar Bowman held the dragon spear in his hand. His heart was as firm as steel. He was only silently estimating the time. 10 seconds. 8 seconds. 2 seconds. Engage, for Erwin. The sky of Ampere Seal seemed to be ignited by the huge sound of battle in an instant. It was boiling. The huge black dragon and the countless birds of prey crossed each other. In an instant, there was a foul wind and a rain of blood. The opened wings were like blades cutting into the storm of feathers, and the corpses of the birds fell like raindrops. However, the Wyvern Knight was also swept away by the great resistance, and the first arrow's attack formation was instantly obliterated. Warning roars, fighting, and screams could be heard from all directions. The knights at the front were pulled down from their saddles by the huge impact, and the wyverns could not bear the burden either. They wailed and fell down one by one. They were like black meteors. The flames of war spread and burned. The buzz of discussion in the hall seemed to have died down in an instant. There was only dead silence under the solemn vault of Rockshby Palace. Time seemed to have frozen at this moment. "The Shire, is that you?" The captain of the Highland Knight Regiment, Bun-Eyed Norbert, stood tall. He had a confident look on his face. His voice was not loud, but it echoed in the hall. There was an uproar. Everyone looked at each other. "Captain Bun-Eyed, you said that name?" An envoy asked in disbelief. That person stood up from Grenoir's seat. Captain Bun-eyed, are you sure you're not mistaken? Another counselor joined in loudly. This person was a trusted aide of Duke Vero. Brando had met him once in the game. The others were also discussing, and most of their eyes were focused on the Shire. Ah! The Countess suddenly let out a scream. She looked at the young mage as if she had seen a ghost. Why didn't I notice? It really looks like him. Looks like what? What's wrong? Brando was baffled. He was a little amused at first. What was funny was that Benninger, who was just performing at the side, had become a clown. But the current situation was a little beyond his expectations. He could not help but turn around and look at his mage attendant as if he was getting to know him again. The Shire, you seem to be quite famous. Can you explain? Ha! The Shire laughed dryly. My lord, I think this is just a misunderstanding. I don't think so. It's true. Then you better explain it to them. Brando was suddenly startled. He heard the sound of fighting outside the hall. He immediately stopped. The other party blinked his eyes, which meant, let's talk later. The battle had begun. The Shire immediately understood his lord's meaning. He immediately turned around and replied to the captain of the Highland Knight Regiment, Captain, I think you might have mistaken me for someone else? The hall was silent again. From the sudden noise to the sudden silence, the change was very natural. You're mistaken, aren't you? Knight Bun-eyed smiled and raised his eyebrows. He wanted to say something, but before he could finish, the entire hall suddenly shook. Bun-eyed paused and raised his head in confusion. Everyone subconsciously raised their heads. The voice clearly came from above. What happened? Almost immediately, the second tremor came as expected. But this time it was more violent. Most of the people were caught off guard and fell to the ground. What happened? What happened? Is it an earthquake? The hall was in chaos. With a loud crash, the crystal dome of Roxby Hall suddenly broke open. Crystal shards fell and a cold wind blew in. Then, a huge object fell straight down and landed with a loud crash. Help! For a moment, the wind and rain outside poured down, but the hall was filled with smoke and dust. The nobles were almost scared to death, and screams immediately rang out. Only Brando saw the object clearly. There was a corpse of a wyvern lying in the middle of the hall. Its neck was broken. It was the Wyvern Knight of the Black Blade Squad. Almost at the same time, Grand Duke Arek's steady and powerful voice sounded. Kill our way out. Everyone was stunned for a moment, but they immediately reacted. Knight of the Holy Cathedral, stop Makarov. This was Moro's voice. Capture Princess Griffine. Benninger screamed. Brando also reacted quickly. He immediately protected Dilfrey with one hand and ordered loudly, The Shire, kill your way to the princess. The hall was immediately in chaos. Dalet's face was covered in blood. He looked out through the half-broken mask and saw that the world was almost blood-red. Countless birds of prey were flying around. The battlefield in the sky was like a land of death. In the center, the great druid wearing a tree cloak was like a god. Every time he cast a spell, a wooden spear or a rock spike would be formed from his hands, and a large number of wyvern knights would fall from the sky. Great druid, upper gold ranked. Dalet felt a chill in his heart. If not for the voice from the magic crystal, he would have trembled. The cold killing was quickly devouring everyone's will to fight. Third and fourth squads, get into formation. It's Viscount Bowman, the Viscount has charged in. Guards, cover the assault. Roars could be heard from the magic crystal. The Wyvern Knight was regrouping in midair. They were preparing for the final battle. Wyverns were not suitable for fighting in midair for long periods of time, especially when they were carrying the same weight as the knight. Damn those southerners. Dalet gritted his teeth. But this was the final attack. In front, Viscount Kootstar Bowman's wyvern was charging forward. The strength of an intermediate gold-ranked was on full display. It was like a comet in the sky. The wyvern knight's eyes were filled with fanaticism. They followed closely behind. The arrow was ready and the encirclement was close. Although the wyvern knight had suffered heavy losses, the enemy was also at their wits' end. The scales of victory were tilted. Look below. Reinforcements are here. An excited voice came from the magic crystal again. Dalet turned his head and saw a red dot rising in the port of Ampere Seal. The Knight Regiment of the Holy Cathedral of Fire stationed in the port, had moved. The Holy Cathedral of Fire had joined the battle. Suddenly he just wanted to shout excitedly. It was a battle to his heart's content. But was the enemy a respectable opponent? Probably. Dalet's mind was filled with chaotic thoughts. He unconsciously glanced to the side, and then his vision was forever fixed in that direction. West of Ampere Seal. In the direction of the Erect Mountains. A black dot was rapidly approaching. Left wing, a large number of unknown air units have been discovered on the left wing. I repeat, all units, a large number of unknown air units have been discovered on the left wing. A stuttering voice came from the magic crystal. Wait. No, the other party is also a Wyvern Knight? Reinforcements? Everyone was stunned. Where did the reinforcements come from? But only Dalet's pupils constricted. His eyesight was excellent, and he could see the other party's origin and designation from afar. That was not reinforcements at all. It's the enemy attack. He suddenly grabbed the magic crystal and screamed. It's the Southern Legion. It's the Wyvern Cavalry of the Southern Legion. Prepare to meet the enemy. At that moment he suddenly understood. The Knight of the Holy Cathedral of Fire was not here to support them at all. They were here to meet the Southern Legion, but why would the Southern Legion appear here? Martha Buff. In the midst of the storm. Nosida stood upright on his mount like a javelin, allowing the wind and rain to blow on his face. Lightning flashed and thunder lit up his eyes, but his heart was as calm as an ancient well. He subconsciously touched his cheek. The injury he suffered in the loop of trade winds had left him with a permanent scar, but then he felt relieved. A scar was a warrior's medal. At least he had returned to the Southern Legion. He looked back and saw that the wyvern beside him was carrying the same number of tree-elf archers. The other party responded with a nod. They were once comrades who fought side by side, and now they were going to work together again. It was just that their target was no longer the calamity of wolves. Yes, the kingdom had abandoned them. But the Southern Legion could not abandon their homeland. Nosida raised his spear and pointed it forward. Dragoons, listen to my command. Attack formation. Target Black Blade Squad. For Erwin, advance. A huge arrow was formed in the air. Southern Legion, advance. Everyone knew that Erwin's civil war had officially begun. In a cloud of dust, Brando faced his first opponent, a knight of the Holy Cathedral. When he saw the other party was fighting Maynard. In fact, the black-haired female knight was losing ground. But she could not afford to be careless, because Princess Griffine was just one step behind her. Seeing this, Brando did not hesitate and stabbed his sword. Brando's swordsmanship had always been fierce and barbaric, and this attack was no exception. He did not care about aristocratic etiquette at all. It was almost similar to a sneak attack. The Knight of the Holy Cathedral of Fire was a powerhouse with elemental activation, but they could not do anything in the face of such a persistent attack. They could only turn their swords around to save her. With a clang, the two swords clashed and both swords were pushed back. Maynard finally found a chance to take a step back. She covered her mouth with her hand and coughed out blood. She gasped and immediately looked up at Brando with a pale face. The swordsmanship. Who taught you? We'll talk about it later. Maynard gritted her teeth but still nodded. The Knight of the Holy Cathedral had already noticed Brando. In fact, the other party obviously recognized him. His eyes under the metal mask flashed with a cold light. Brando immediately felt the air around him stagnate slightly, and even his movements slowed down. Be careful, his element should be related to wind. Maynard immediately reminded. The female knight's voice was cold, but there was still a little concern in it. This voice made Brando feel a little excited. So similar. So similar to Senior. If Senior Sister is still here, if she was still in this world, Senior Sister. Brando could not help but close his eyes. For a moment, he felt that his perception seemed to extend endlessly along his sword. It was obviously dark, but all the scenery seemed to be in front of him. Bit by bit. A world made of laws. A towering wall appeared in front of him just like that. The elemental wall. Brendel's heart trembled. He suddenly opened his eyes and everything in his eyes was different. The deepest part of his eyes seemed to be burning with a silver flame. Countless laws of the world, meaning, and the ultimate fate of all things were evolving in an infinite direction. How was this possible? He raised his sword. Wind elemental bind. The most secondary elemental. You want to bind me with this? It's just a bug. An incomparably confident voice seemed to be above all things. Brando raised his sword with one hand and swung it. The Temple Knight's sword had just arrived. When the two swords clashed, it was as if Brando had casually thrown out a spark. The sword in the Temple Knight's hand flew out of his hand. The Temple Knight was shocked. He never dreamed that there would be such a freak who could touch the elemental wall in the middle of a battle. Brando's sword was not his own strength, but the power of the law itself. As soon as he woke up, this sword was born from the world of the law. Impossible to resist. However, the Temple Knight was one of the top fighting forces of the Holy Cathedral of Fire. As soon as the sword left his hand, he immediately reacted and retreated as fast as lightning. Brando leveled his sword and slashed horizontally. The tip of the sword missed the opponent by a hair. But it was exactly so. A dash. The Temple Knight suddenly let out a scream of disbelief. He covered his chest with one hand. There was a wound on his breastplate that was neither too deep nor too shallow, and blood was flowing out. Brando raised his head, his heart was already ecstatic. His eyes flashed with a terrifying light. Surefire hit. PS Surefire hit. Looking for monthly votes. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 575. The flying dust stopped for a moment, and a layer of golden lines floated in this vast and enclosed space. With Brando as the center, the other end was connected to the laws of the whole world. It only flashed for a moment and disappeared in a flash. This was element. At the same time, Brando's element status column extended down a branch, and there was a small line of attributes above it. Sure hit. As long as the lines of law are stable, the caster can make the next attack appear at any coordinate in space. Activating this authority requires 50 order power. Old friend, we finally meet again. Brando almost looked at this attribute with some nostalgia. Element, in fact, was the power of the law. There was a leap from the peak of gold to the elemental realm. It surpassed all levels of power in the mortal world, and built an insurmountable gap between the two. This gap was even far beyond the gap between gold and silver, and the gap between silver and iron. Among the mortals, only a few geniuses could finally touch the elemental wall and master this power. But once this power was mastered, after crossing the gap, it was another world. There was a consensus among the players in his previous life. The first page of the Amber Sword's history was truly opened when the first player reached level 55, to Elemental Awakening. In fact, this level fluctuated according to the part-time job. For this page, Sophie once spent 3.5 years. And at that time, the world's number one took 10 months. And this time he took a year. But this was because he took a big detour in Tonagel and was distracted by the layout. For the same reason, he could fully estimate that his actual combat power was far beyond the so-called number one in the world at that time. Brando gently raised the blade, the tip of the sword pointed at the opposite knight, the dark blade of Howran Gaia faintly resonating with the space around it. Words were law and cause and effect were reversed. Among the elements, must-hit had many manifestations, but his must-hit was obviously not one of them. Instead, it had a distinct spatial characteristic. The spatial element, this was almost one of the strongest elements. How could Brando not be happy? This was many times stronger than his element in his previous life. His previous life's elemental attributes could not be compared to this. Could it be that transmigration could change the elemental attributes of one's face? The soul named Sophie could not help but feel envious of Brando, although it seemed a little strange to be jealous of himself. However, he felt that it was a pity. In the stage of elemental awakening, the upper limit of order power was 100, and using a sure hit would consume half of it. The previous sword strike was an unconscious attack after leaving the world of laws. Otherwise, the Temple Knight's head would have fallen to the ground if he was caught off guard. If he missed this opportunity, it wouldn't be so easy in the future. Even though he could make his sword appear at any point in space with just a thought, the prerequisite was that the lines of law had to be stable. Brando looked up and saw that the golden lines of law that he controlled and only he could see could not be stable over an infinite distance. In fact, beyond 50 meters, the lines of law that weaved the world would gradually dim. At the same time, where these golden lines approached the Temple Knight, there were also distortions. This meant that there were places where the lines of law overlapped and intersected with the Temple Knights. This was because the Temple Knight was also a powerhouse in the elemental realm. He had even activated his elemental attributes and was stronger than him. If not for the fact that the space elemental attribute was too strong and he was caught off guard, it would be difficult for him to kill with one blow. Of course, a sure hit was a sure hit. With such a strong elemental attribute, it was easy for him to hurt the Temple Knight. However, in order to add another scar to the Temple Knight, he would have to use up all the remaining order power. Brando had not lost his mind to this point. Unfortunately, this is only the active ability of elemental awakening. If I could actively manipulate the elements, with the strength of the space elemental attribute, I could have a fair fight with the Temple Knight. But that would have to wait until after Elemental Awakening. He withdrew his sword and immediately helped Maynard, who was half kneeling beside him, up. The female knight snorted softly with a cold face and frowned. She seemed to be in pain. She had to stop a Temple Knight with the strength of a gold ranker. Obviously she was injured badly. Although Maynard was not related to him in any way, Brando always felt that he was supporting his senior. When he thought about how the Temple Knight was so merciless to a woman, especially to a Temple Knight, Maynard was almost unarmed, he could not help but glare at the Temple Knight. Without a doubt, if not for the fact that he could not beat the Temple Knight, Brando would have rushed up with Haurangaya for another 300 rounds. The Temple Knight on the other side had obviously sensed that Brando was not to be trifled with. He covered his wound with one hand and took a step back vigilantly. He had never seen a freak who could touch the elemental wall in battle. There was no record of such a freak in the thousands of years of history of the temple. Moreover, he did not take a step back to let Brando and the princess escape. At this time, the hall had already fallen under the control of the temple. A large hole had been smashed open in the crystal dome of Rockshby Palace. It looked like a lifeless eye, indifferently looking at the gloomy sky outside. Rainwater slid down the crystal dome, forming layers of texture when seen from below. The water flowed through the broken section, drooping down several dirty waterfalls. The water splashed across the ground, and the smoke and dust in the hall quickly settled in the muddy water. The water on the ground was already half an inch deep, and there were toppled chairs everywhere. Around the hall, there were already monk soldiers pouring in from outside. The sword hero Nicholas of the Cipher royal family and curiosity seeker Garlock guarded the two side doors on the left and right. Behind them there was another temple knight guarding the main door. Including Archbishop Moros, there were 5 elemental realm powerhouses in this hall alone. Not to mention, there was also the elemental awakened veteran general of Black Blade, Gerald, who could be considered half an elemental realm powerhouse. Brando supported Maynard, while the princess and Oberway stood behind him. The royal faction stood on the other side, led by Makarov and Fleetwood, with Buga as their bodyguard. They could be considered as having 2 elemental realm powerhouses. It was a pity that Freya did not have the qualifications to enter the temple, or else she would be able to intimidate these people. Brando looked around and saw many familiar faces in the crowd. These people were all famous NPCs in the game. Most of them were gold-ranked powerhouses in the north, and the weakest was at the peak of silver-ranked. He had dealt with these people many times in the past or did quests under them. After all, most of the gold-ranked powerhouses were nobles with fiefs, and their titles were not low. Other than Coden, most of the people under Count Randner were retainers of high status. In the early days of the game, the player's status was far inferior to these NPCs, and it was normal for them to make a living under them. It was just that he did not expect that in today's Ampere Seal, these people would become complete cannon fodder and side characters. Brendel could not help but feel a little emotional for a moment. The hall was silent for a moment, and only the sound of water could be heard. The nobles who had nothing to do with today's matter, such as the envoys under Duke Grenoires and Duke Viro, were all pale with fright. They probably expected the situation to change, but they did not expect both sides to turn hostile so quickly. At this moment, they were chased to the side by the monk soldiers and did not dare to make a sound. They could only watch the changes in the hall. Only the Highland Knight and his men stood in the middle of the hall with bun-eyed. Only they did not have a single monk soldier beside them. Brando could not help but sigh. As expected, powerful people were powerful everywhere. As for Duke Arek, he did not even know where he was. He must have killed his way out in the chaos and did not want to get involved in this mess. With the strength of the Eagle Swordsman and the Silver Knight beside him, there was probably no one who could stop them outside the Holy Cathedral. Then Brando saw Dilfrey. This Countess Yenbao's daughter was not too frightened under the protection of Andrique. Not to mention she also had 3 gold-ranked guards by her side. In fact, there were more than 10 gold-ranked warriors in the royal faction, including him and the Sword Guardian family. However, the number of elemental realm powerhouses was too low. Brando knew this very well. Everyone present had seen the situation clearly. The new Archbishop of Anderla Cathedral, Moros, was naturally aware of the situation. Therefore, other than his cold expression, he was calm and seemed to be somewhat fearless. He stood at his original position with 2 high priests on his left and right, motionless. He raised his head and glanced at the Highland Knights at the side, then turned his head. Obviously, this archbishop did not intend to provoke these troublemakers. In his opinion, Duke Karsuk was fine, but the Highland Knight was the real troublesome opponent. They were backed by the Black Tower sorcerers. You say you don't know what the Black Tower sorcerers are? Then you must know that the dozens of floating cities in the sky are not just used to build floating gardens. Obviously, Duke Karsuk sent these Highland Knight to this meeting to discuss them. This duke had always been rebellious towards the central government. He knew this, but he did not want to participate in the intrigue of this kingdom. Moros glanced at Duke Cypher, who was beside him. The duke's expression was not good. Only then did he turn around and look at the princess. Your Highness, the situation is very clear. Now what do you have to say? The head ritual master said slowly. Where is Benninger? Princess Griffin frowned and asked. She silently counted the people in the hall, but did not see the face that she hated the most. The half-elf princess's face was cold. She did not hate the archbishop for lying to her, but the fact that her brother was still in the archbishop's hands. Thinking of this, she gritted her teeth. In order to protect the safety of the witness, he has been sent to a safe place. Moros replied without changing his expression. If it was an ordinary person, he would not mind sending him out to vent the princess's anger if she agreed to his next request. But this person was different. First of all, he was the youngest son of Duke Cypher. More importantly, he was his own identity and status. He shook his head and replied, Your Highness, please do not be stubborn. No, Lord Officiant, there's a problem here, a voice suddenly said. Actually, it's like this. I think the issues that everyone wants to discuss are too complicated, but it's almost time for breakfast. Your Highness is still growing. I think you should send us out for breakfast and continue this meeting to show the etiquette of a host. Everyone was slightly stunned at first. Interrupting in this kind of situation was not a standard thing to do. Everyone present could not help but look for the person who did not follow the etiquette of a noble. But when the person finished speaking, everyone could not help but be stunned. Even Grimoires and the nobles under Duke Vero could tell that this was not a discussion about breakfast. Someone actually dared to joke about the archbishop at this time. Was he crazy? Even the leader of the Highland Knight could not help but raise his eyebrows and look over with a face full of surprise. In fact, everyone's eyes were focused on the aide of Count Yenbao because the person who spoke was Brando. If Moros's face was cold before, it was now so cold that it was almost dripping with water. He looked at Brando as if he was looking at a dead man and said, Sir, if you think that mocking me before you die will make you feel better, I don't mind if you say a few more words. He shook his head contemptuously and said, I have seen many cultists. Most of them are people like you who only know how to talk. Brando smiled slightly and said, No, 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 you are mistaken, Archbishop. What I said just now was not for you. What I am going to say next is for you. I just don't know if you want to listen. Of course not. Duke Cypher, whose face was green with anger, finally interrupted. He first looked at the Highland Knight and said sarcastically, Do you know who the Archbishop is? How can she listen to your nonsense here? He was just casually reprimanding Moros. But he did not expect Brendel to suddenly stop talking and turn around to look at him coldly. At that moment, the Grand Duke felt as if the air around him had been sucked away, as if countless sharp blades were piercing his body, and infinite layers of space were pressing down on him. Duke Cypher felt as if the end of the world had arrived, and he could not help but scream in fear. If not for Marquis Yoakum supporting him from the side, he would have fallen into the dirty water. Brando looked at him and Yoakum behind him and said coldly, Clowns, you have done a disgraceful thing and you will pay for it later. Yoakum was also shocked. Although Brando did not say it, it seemed to be hinting at something. He was faintly uneasy and thought of the matter with Princess Magadal. He lowered his head and wondered if he should confirm with Archbishop Moros later. It was at this moment that the Archbishop exclaimed softly. He raised his hand and cut off the line of sight between Brendel and Duke Cypher. At first, he did not notice that Brendel had the ability to manifest his elemental powers. In fact, Brendel had already used the power of his elemental powers in that glance. For an ordinary person like Duke Cypher, he only needed to move the line of law slightly to scare him to death. But if the opponent was someone with outstanding strength like Arek, it would be difficult to do so. Of course, if Brando wanted to use his absolute hit ability, he could kill someone with elemental powers within 50 meters, even if they were at the pinnacle of gold. Humph, Moros snorted coldly, showing off just because you are a little smart. You're just a junior. I would like to see what you have to say to me. Brando spread out his hands. I am not the one who provoked you first, Archbishop. But what I want to say to you is, before you think of getting rid of us, you should consider your own safety first. His own safety? Moros could not help but feel a little amused. In fact, he was sneering. Of course, it could not be ruled out that Brando was hiding his strength. Otherwise, it would be impossible to explain how his strength had increased so quickly. But as an elemental realm priest, how could he be killed by 4 elemental powerhouses? Even the strongest of the officiators in the Holy Cathedral of Fire did not have such strength. But before he could retract his sneer, just as Brando finished his last word, he suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Since Moros had reached this point in his life, he had encountered at least 800 big and small dangers. For someone like him, no matter how terrible the crisis was, he wouldn't be afraid. But this time, Moros had an illusion that he was being targeted by a terrible giant beast and would die in the next moment. He had not had such a premonition for many years. His expression changed and he subconsciously turned his head. But there were too many people around and someone had already shouted, "Look over there, who is that?" Moros saw a hand reaching out from the void beside Brando. This hand was lifting a piece of cloth. To be exact, it was a cloak. Giant's cloak? He was quite knowledgeable and recognized it at a glance. But the next moment, the Archbishop could not help but jump up. Not only him, but all the high-ranking priests and knight from Cruz could not help but show a look of fear. This is impossible. Mephisto. Ash Sword Saint. Long time no see, Moros. This time I have a gift for you people from Cruz. A middle-aged man smiled at them as if he was harmless. But in the next moment, a terrible power spread out from his body and shrouded the entire hall in an instant. Everyone's expression changed. This was the most powerful aura in the mortal world. P.S. I was stuck in the morning and wanted to take a break to find some inspiration. But after thinking about it, I decided that it would be better to write a chapter every day so that it would not break again. Fortunately, I finally finished it. Sure enough, people still have to force themselves. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 576. Back in the Black Forest, Mephisto's power was far from what it was today. He could barely hold on in front of Endesha, the Lord of Withering who controlled the elemental realm. But after the battle with Endesha, his understanding of the Grey Realm deepened. He broke through the peak of elemental activation and entered the ultimate realm. According to Brando's knowledge, this prodigy sword saint would only reach this level in about 5 years. At this rate, it was not impossible for him to enter the Sage Realm in the Great Era. Elemental 5 realms. Elemental activation, elemental truth, ultimate realm, Sage Realm. Since the earliest era, Tiamat, the law of the world and magic, had written down such rules. After the elemental activation, those who passed through the 5 worlds were like travelers. Only after passing through them one by one could they reach the ultimate realm that Martha called. The first world, Justo's Wall of Truth and Thorns, was the wall of elemental elements. Only by passing through this long wall on the line of law of the world could one reach the first world. Mortals called it elemental activation, a world that touched upon the truth. The second world, White Tower, Ovilia. Legend has it that the White Tower supported all the order in Wonde. It was the beginning and end of all the lines of law. All the laws formed a circle called the world, with it as the center. Martha wrote down all the truths and laws on the White Tower. Travelers climbed up the White Tower and understood the true meaning of the world one by one. It was like a child and an elder walking hand in hand. Mortals called it elemental truth. The third world, Spiral Peak, Holy Mountain Yggdrasil, the place where all the truth was born. Above the White Tower, a huge spiral was completely opposite to the White Tower. It was a place of chaos. Pale Poem described it as Martha's hometown. This was the place where chaos and order were in harmony. The world was black on the top and white on the bottom, coexisting. Fragments of the old world floated in the endless distortion. Wonde was rooted in this soil and at the same time, it deduced the past, present, and future. After mastering the ultimate realm, one would enter the ultimate realm, the sacred palace. The fourth world, the final plains. This was the place where Martha had created the Wonde. Now, there was only a gray-white plain, and the most primitive power and elements were running on the plain. Looking up, the sky was the sea of magic. The sea of magic was magnificent, never stopping and always flowing in one direction. It was the direction of time, space, and all kinds of energy. This was also the lowest level world closest to Wonde. It could be said that it was the shadow of Wonde. Finally, the fifth world, the Lake of Beginnings, the place where life was first born. Legend had it that this place was connected to the abyss pool of the blind goddess Irene. Thus it could reveal all secrets and truths, even the future. Only by reaching this place would a mortal be able to return to their original self, transcend mortality, and step into the realm of true saints. It was what mortals called the sage domain. Of course, he didn't really want to reach these worlds. But as his power grew, he would gradually see these scenes in his spiritual world. Just like when Brando touched the elemental wall, the invisible wall of laws did exist in his spiritual world. Now he had one foot in the door of transcendence. In fact, after the battle with Endesha, he saw the ultimate meaning of the spiral peak. The ultimate realm had long since opened its doors to him. The ultimate meaning of the gray element. He stood there with his famous greatsword still in its sheath. He smiled at the two high-ranked priests of Cruz, the two knight of the Holy Cathedral and Archbishop Moros. But it was as if the world had turned into a colorless gray. In this gray world there was no black and white, no two opposite poles. There was no such thing as time flowing or not flowing, and there was no such thing as death or existence. Everything was in a state between two extremes. Thus, Mephisto didn't care whether he was attacking or defending. In his law, life and death were nothingness and existence was meaningless. He just stood there in front of Moros, and the Archbishop felt his hair stand on end. He felt as if he would turn into ashes with a single glance. His existence was even more worthless than ashes. The ultimate realm? Moros' expression changed. "Why am I here, Moros? You know best." Mephisto did not answer. Instead he said, "When my country died, I knew where you were." Upon hearing this, the Archbishop of Anderla Cathedral knew that there was no going back. "Mephisto, it's not too late to regret." He winked at his subordinates. The Holy Cathedral Knight received the order and stabbed Mephisto with his sword. But the Grey Sword Saint did not seem to see it. The sword pierced through his body. "Petty tricks won't save you, Moros. Today you're dead." Everyone saw this strange scene clearly. In a world of gray, just a moment ago they were still in the hall of Roxby Palace, but in the next moment, the whole world seemed to have turned into a grayish-white wilderness. The Grey Sword Saint was in the middle of the field. The Holy Cathedral Knight stabbed him as if he had stabbed a piece of paper or an illusion. But Mephisto's illusion was still talking. Eden Rant, the Wind Knight of the Holy Cathedral. What a great reputation. He waved his hand, and the great sword on his back drew an unparalleled arc in the air. Although it felt like an illusion, the paladin's arm that was holding the great sword was sent flying high into the air with a dull thud. Countless droplets of blood spurted out. The Holy Cathedral Knight screamed and hurriedly used his remaining arm to protect his body. The sky-blue lines of law extended along his arm and weaved into a huge shield. The wind was soft and as sharp as steel, but it could not save his life. Mephisto's gray sword slid down his arm. Wherever it passed, the sky-blue lines of law were assimilated and disintegrated. If time does not flow, the wind will naturally stop as well. Mephisto stabbed the knight's heart. 2/3 of the blade went in, and the tip of the sword even pierced the knight's back armor. Eden Rant struggled futilely like a lobster on a skewer. Gurgling sounds came from his mouth. Then his head fell to the side and he lost all signs of life. A dignified elemental paladin from the Holy Cathedral was killed on the spot without even taking a single blow. Almost everyone present except Brendel swallowed a mouthful of saliva. "Now," Moros growled, "I hold the holy commandment in my hand. In the name of the Lord of Flames, diffuse, I command this pure fire to purify all sins in the world." He pointed forward, and the temperature in Roxby Hall suddenly rose. The ground in the hall seemed to crack, and the water in the hall instantly evaporated into white smoke. The ground rumbled and golden rays of light shot out from the cracks. The marble pillars of the Anderla Cathedral cracked, and under the ground, a sea of magma gushed out. In an instant the hall looked like hell. Flame of sin. Brando and Grey Sword Saint Mephistopheles cursed in their hearts at the same time. They were probably the only ones who knew what was going on. One of them had 2 lifetimes of experience, while the other had been enemies with Cruz and the Holy Cathedral of Fire all year round. Naturally, they could tell that Moros's holy spell was the 10th circle spell, Flame of Sin. Once this spell was cast, the Anderla Great Temple would be reduced to the dust of history. Brando cursed in his heart, but this was probably not the time to curse. He immediately pulled Maynard and Princess Griffin back. The ground in front of them cracked inch by inch and golden flames spewed out from the ground. Everything touched by the flames turned into ashes in an instant. Fortunately, he reacted quickly, but the noble envoys on the other side were not so lucky. Most of them were caught in the flames at the first moment and turned into ashes while screaming. The Shire reacted quickly as a mage. He cast a protective spell to protect the people around him. However, protective spells were not omnipotent. The sea of fire was approaching step by step, and in the blink of an eye, it would surround them. The Shire. Brando quickly shouted, "Blow this cathedral up." The Shire was stunned. "Sir, are you sure? This cathedral is a priceless treasure. It was built a few centuries ago. It was the painstaking effort of a master craftsman. It is an artistic treasure in the history of Erewhon. Mr. Brando, you can't do that." Princess Griffin could not help but scold him. "Stop talking nonsense, blow it up." Brando thought to himself. Besides, Moros seemed to be ready to tear this place down. If they did not tear it down now, it would probably be torn down by him. "I understand." The Shire immediately became serious. He looked up at the crystal dome of the cathedral and raised a hand. The law of destruction, the authority of Tiamat, the dragon of war, dragon strike. A light green beam of light appeared in his outstretched palm. This beam of light seemed to penetrate the dome of Roxby Hall. With the Shire's palm as the center, the other end connected to the dark clouds in the sky. The next moment, the flow of time slowed down. Space rapidly condensed in the center of his palm until it formed a singularity. In an instant, a bright white light burst out from that singularity. The entire space seemed to have undergone a strange expansion. Then a huge shockwave appeared. Everyone who wasn't affected by the flames subconsciously looked up, only to see that the entire upper half of the Anderla Cathedral seemed to have been blown apart by the shockwave. The stones, wood, tiles, glass, and crystals seemed to have been disintegrating in all directions before exploding in a single explosion. Boom. Looking from a few miles away, even the whole of Ampere Seal witnessed the explosion. Everyone in the port and above the port could not help but stop and stare dumbfoundedly as more than half of the Anderla Cathedral was blown apart. Roxby Hall was now an open-air pile of rubble. Everyone in the hall stiffly retracted their gazes and looked at the young man who caused all this. "Brando, you." Princess Griffin bit her lower lip. Her face was pale and she almost fainted from anger. Brando could not help but facepalm. "The Shire, I asked you to blow up Roxby Hall, not the entire Anderla Cathedral." "But you said to blow up the cathedral, my lord." The Shire was extremely innocent. "This is a misunderstanding." Brando looked at Griffin guiltily. The future Princess Regent was so angry that she could not speak. The Anderla Cathedral was one of Erewhon's most precious cultural relics. Most importantly, this cathedral was built on the site of the former King Eric's palace. "It's all right. Besides, isn't there still half of it left?" The Shire replied very optimistically. But before he could finish, there was a loud bang and a column of magma spewed out from the ground. Next, countless amounts of fire and magma spewed out from the rubble. In the blink of an eye, the remaining structure of the Anderla Cathedral was caught in a sea of fire. The ground was still trembling and roaring. It was obvious that the true power of the level 10 spell was still buried deep underground, ready to unleash its final fury on the cathedral. Brando's face suddenly changed. "Quick, leave this place." In fact, there was no need for him to remind them. In the hall, if there was still a hall, the remaining people had already begun to panic and were pushing each other to escape. "Wait, what about that, uncle?" Dilfrey asked loudly. Brando glanced at the sea of fire. The flames had completely covered the figures of Moros and the Ash Sword Saint. He shook his head. "Don't worry, Moros is still not his match. The ones who should be worried are us." "Us?" Brando nodded seriously. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 577. Moros, you've gone mad. "I'm not the mad one, Mephistopheles. Do you think you can destroy everything? You're wrong. You can't do anything." Archbishop Moro's robe fluttered in the hot wind, and a sinister smile appeared on his cold face. "Don't compare me with those cowards. What you and they are after is not worth mentioning. Haha, my goal is noble. Moros." The Ash Sword Saint rested his sword on his shoulder, and his gray eyes burned with madness. Golden lava spewed out from the ground, but he ignored it. Instead, he bared his white teeth and stared at the Archbishop like a wild beast. "You've got one thing wrong. I don't care about your goal. I'm only here to kill you. No murderer can go unpunished. I'm not an exception. You're not an exception. Even the Emperor of the Cruz Empire is not an exception. So," the gray-haired man in black raised his sword and pointed it at the stunned Moros. Please go to hell. A gray ripple spread out from the tip of his sword. In an instant, the Roxby Palace and the Anderla Cathedral disappeared. Only a vast gray plain was left between the two men. The flames underground seemed to have lost their last shackles. In an instant, a sea of fire rose from the feet of Moros and Mephistopheles. At this moment, the level 10 spell was finally completed, and it exploded with its greatest power. It was as if a golden flame sword had pierced out from the ground. The blade was hundreds of feet wide and pierced into the sky. A pillar of light could be seen from dozens of miles away. A golden red cross shone in the sky. All of the terrifying power burned away the Ash Sword Saint's robes, revealing his inner armor. The black armor gradually turned golden red, and the gray lines of law flickered. Every line was dazzling, and even his eyebrows and hair were set ablaze, making him look like a man on fire. However, Mephistopheles did not seem to hear it. He stepped out of the flames. The flames burned on his body, but they were cold and had no temperature. His eyes reflected the golden red flames as he approached Moros step by step. He was like a monster that had walked out of the lava pool of hell. The Ash Sword Saint raised his sword, which was covered in a layer of golden red. It had already turned into a huge flaming sword. No, the flames can't hurt you. No, you are protected by the power of this world. Where is this place? Moros screamed. Moros, you could have used your strongest offensive spell and your elemental power. You would have had a chance to win this battle. However, you chose to use this AoE spell. You are too greedy. Mephistopheles shook his head as he walked closer to Moros. The final plane, the gray field. I see. Moros suddenly understood. I see. This is the fourth realm. He suddenly screamed as the Ash Sword Saint's sword stabbed into his chest. The Archbishop, who was in the middle of channeling the spell, could not move at all. The terrifying power of the backlash immediately surged into his body, burning his limbs in an instant. Ah! Moros suddenly laughed. Haha, you think I'm greedy? You're wrong, cough cough. Mephisto, why don't you go and save them? They're dead meat. The Ash Sword Saint looked at him with pity in his eyes. Moros suddenly stopped, and a look of astonishment appeared on his face. What do you mean by that look? Moros. You've underestimated him. The Ash Sword Saint nodded. Moros coughed violently. The light in his eyes was fading rapidly. At the last moment of his life he seemed to see the huge ring again. Everything returns to ring, everything returns to one. The Archbishop of the Holy Cathedral of Fire widened his eyes and groaned, Feudal, 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 feudal. Will I never understand the nature of the world? Brando. Brando had just led the princess and the others out of the ruins of the Anderla Cathedral when he heard a familiar voice calling his name. He turned around and saw a group of people in a sea of fire. The leader of the night turned around and saw them. Brando smiled. Breton, we meet again. The young man on the horse also smiled. It has indeed been a long time. I didn't expect to be in the same trench as you this time. Erwin, people should be in the same trench. Brando replied. Breton paused for a moment, then nodded. He dismounted and came to the front of the group. He bowed to Maynard and Princess Griffin. Your Highness, Knight Commander Maynard. What's the situation? Maynard's face was pale, and there were traces of blood at the corner of her mouth. If not for Brando supporting her, she would not have been able to stand, but she still asked. The first to arrive were the guards. Freya and Moke led the students to repel them a few times. Now they have retreated to Juggler's Street and 47th Street, but there are no fortifications. They should be waiting for reinforcements. Breton replied proudly. He had a reason to be so. The students of the Royal Knight Academy could be said to be the backbone of the kingdom. They were originally selected from the nobles and the best youths of the guards in the south. After systematic learning and training, they could be said to be the best military talents in Erwin. This was not a boast. The history that Brando knew also proved this point. This army of officers was the main force of the Princess Regent's future expeditions. What about the patrolling cavalry? What about the Black Blade Squad? Maynard frowned. They won't be coming. Brando interrupted. Sani and his clansmen must have succeeded. Of course, I don't know that the Nagas are attacking the inner city. It's enough to distract the defenders of Ampere Seal by attacking the port. But I don't know that the Nagas are attacking the inner city. It's enough to distract the defenders of Ampere Seal. As for the Black Blade Squad, the Wyvern Knight from both sides were currently engaged in a fierce battle in the sky above Ampere Seal. From time to time, the corpses of wyverns and birds of prey would fall from the sky and shatter into pieces. For Brando, it was actually very easy to convince the Southern Legion. Ironically, because of the situation in Erewhon, the Southern Legion that guarded the borders of the kingdom had fallen into oblivion. In fact, the royal faction had always tacitly allowed Count Randner to collude with Madara. This made the Southern Legion's life even more difficult. In fact, 2 years later, when the current commander of the Southern Legion, Count Lydie, died in battle, the Southern Legion was basically disbanded and erased from history. Later on, when Erewhon was revived, Madara invaded the southern border for the second time, and almost overnight, the Valkyrie was attacked from the back and died in the Crimson Canyon. In fact, a large part of the reason was the evil karma that the royal faction had sowed. The destruction of the Southern Legion in this era was seen as a compromise with Count Randner. Although the royal faction won in the end, it deeply hurt the hearts of the people in the south. Brando naturally would not let this happen again, but he lacked an opportunity. Furthermore, he did not know where the Southern Legion was at this moment. It was not until Nasuda's appearance that a real opportunity presented itself in front of him. Both sides hit it off almost immediately. The Southern Legion that was at the end of their road desperately needed an ally, especially when Brando could use the princess's name. At the same time, unlike the royal faction, he did not have a good impression of Count Randner, so he immediately sold him out. In fact, it could not be said that he sold him out. He and Count Randner were originally mortal enemies, and forming an alliance with the Southern Legion could be said to be killing two birds with one stone. Today, the Southern Legion sent Erewhon's most powerful wyvern cavalry to support the princess. In fact, it was part of the alliance, but it was far more than that. Brando only thought that Count Randner's good days were coming to an end. But this thought only lasted for a moment because everyone was looking at him at this moment. "Our ally is restraining them," Brando immediately replied. "Breton, are there any guards at the King's Trail and Forest Avenue?" Breton looked at Maynard, while the black-haired female knight looked at Princess Griffin. The half-fairy princess was standing in the middle of the crowd with a rainproof cloak, her face still pale. She nodded. "Leave everything to Mr. Brando." "But wait a moment." Princess Griffin raised her head and looked at Brando. "Mr. Brando, Amberlight is a famous city in history, and there are many things that are truly precious to the people of Erewhon other than money and power. If you have no other choice, I hope that you—" "I know." Brando nodded. It seemed that the destruction of the Anderla Cathedral had caused her to hold a grudge. In fact, it was not only the princess, but he was also heartbroken. Just like what Princess Griffin said, this was a kingdom with a long history, and there were many things that were regarded as spiritual symbols in this land. If they were to completely destroy everything for the sake of victory, the damage to this ancient kingdom and its people would be unimaginable. But war was war, and Brando could only reply, "We will do our best to protect everything, Your Highness. What we want is not a battered Erewhon." Princess Griffin nodded calmly, indicating that she agreed. He turned his head back. Breton glanced at him and nodded in agreement. He was born in Braggs, and there was a famous clock tower in the city of Braggs. Almost everyone who grew up in Braggs had memories of this clock tower since childhood, and they proudly regarded it as the symbol of Braggs. If one day this clock tower were to collapse in the flames of war, he believed that everyone in Braggs would feel sad. Sometimes, these spiritual symbols were not only precious treasures, but also symbols of hope. As long as they were still there, Erewhon would eventually rise from the ashes. This was the power of culture, and Breton deeply agreed with this point in his heart. "Brando, there are no traces of the guards in the direction of the King's Walk and Forest Avenue, but if we head north, there should be a garrison station near the north gate of Amberlight. Although the Anderla Cathedral was located on the central axis of Amberlight, it was actually located in the east near the port area, in fact in the center of the old port area. There were 5 main roads that led to the cathedral. The King's Walk and Forest Avenue were north of the cathedral, and the Juggler Street and 47 Avenue were south of the cathedral. There was also Petrol Street that led east to the port of Petrol Fortress. Brando let the Nagas occupy the port, and his actual plan was to let the princess and the rest break through to the north, near the Silver Lighthouse outside the city. There was a ship waiting for them there, and then both sides would leave the Silver Lighthouse Bay and rendezvous in the outer sea of Amberlight. This plan seemed extremely bold, but it was full of possibilities. First of all, the north was the hinterland controlled by Duke Cypher, and no one would think that they would break through to the north. Secondly, the sea was raging, and there was almost no possibility of leaving Amberlight through the outer sea. But all of this was possible because of the existence of the demon whale. Now it seemed that the other side had indeed deployed a large number of troops in the south gate. After listening to Breton's description, Brando replied, Ampere Seal has nearly 30,000 coast guards, so it's normal for there to be a large group of troops in front of us. He raised his head. How many people do we have? More than 200 cadets under the command of Freya and Mach. 200 against 1,000. Brando silently looked at the darkness in the north. These were the 200 cadets of the Royal Knight Academy, the backbone of Erwin's resurgence. This elite troop that belonged to Her Royal Highness had shed their last drop of blood in the Second War of the Black Roses, and was completely annihilated in the Crimson Canyon together with the Valkyrie. But in this era of Aween, there was no army that could match them. He raised his head, and the wind and rain in the dark fell on him. Your Royal Highness, please give the order for us to break through to the north and rendezvous with my men. The braziers in Petrol Fortress were burning fiercely, reflecting the faces of everyone who was in a hurry. But this warmth could not dispel the chill in everyone's hearts in the hall. Everyone's face was gloomy. Marquis Urien frowned as he sat at a long table. On the long table was a huge map of the port of Ampere Seal and the nearby areas. There were more and more indicators on the map that represented the enemy. According to the latest round of intelligence, the Nagas had already attacked the trade street along Petrol Avenue. If Petrol Fortress could not stop them, then the inner city would be a smooth path ahead of them. The Marquis rubbed his frowning brows. Let's go out and take a look. After that he stood up, his armor clattering. Before anyone could stop him, the commander of the Coast Guards of Ampere Seal had already pushed open the door with a crash. Outside there was a storm, lightning, and thunder. My lord. Urien was silent. He looked at the rain, and the nearby streets were already filled with people. The flag that represented the Coast Guard still appeared on the main streets near Petrol Avenue, but a few places had already become prominent in the fierce battle. The Nagas' attack was unusually fierce. This was not a robbery at all, but an invasion. Their enemies were soon clear. They were the Grey Fin Nagas Guards. The Grey Fin Nagas Guards were a standard Tier 2 army in the game. Not to mention the Coast Guards of Ampere Seal, even Erwin's regular army was no match for them. The shining Poseidon scepter was like a sharp sword hanging in everyone's heart, and they were not in the mood to speak at all. In the midst of the silence, there was a blurry darkness further away. Other than the earth-shattering killings that proved that there was a battle in those places, the entire port had become a giant beast that devoured lives. The casualties were heavy. Zenopa Lee and his patrolling cavalry are still holding on, but they won't be able to hold on for much longer. The Marquis turned around. Let Eben and Innes bring their troops to support us. My lord, but the Archbishop has ordered that the defense of the South Gate must not be transferred. I'm in charge here now. The Marquis stood in the rain and interrupted him. He turned around and said word by word, this is Ampere Seal, and the Frata Forest is to the south. The territory of the royal faction is separated by the Erect Mountains. Why do we have to invest so much in the South Gate? Is the royal faction already at our doorstep? But Her Highness, that has nothing to do with us. The Marquis replied coldly. Remember, we are the soldiers of Ampere Seal. Protecting this port is our duty. If the Lord Officiator has any questions, he can come to me. The few knights around him looked at each other for a moment, then looked at each other and bowed deeply to the old soldier who had guarded Ampere Seal for more than 10 years. Finally they left the hall one by one. The Marquis sighed. He placed his hand on the cold battlements and suddenly felt that the kingdom was just like the port, swaying in the dark storm. He could not help but look at the dark sea. A bright light rose from the surface of the sea. Carglass looked at the light and turned around. The White Lion Legion was ready to move out. There were only 100 of them, but they had the aura of 10 million people. It was hard for the average person to believe that this was an army from Tanajal. Less than half a year ago they were just a group of youths from the countryside. His heart was burning with passion. Carglass felt that he had made the most important decision in his life. He did not know if it was right or wrong, but at least he would not regret it. Miss Amandina. I saw it too. Amandina stood in the rain and turned around. Her eyes were dark and gloomy. It's time. You should get ready to move out. Please be sure to escort the Lord back safely. I understand. Carglass, remember, the one who can save Erwin is not the royal faction or the princess, but the Lord. Amandina replied faintly. Carglass paused for a moment. Miss Amandina, do you also think that the Lord should not take this risk? It is not wise, Amandina sighed. But it is precisely because of this that we believe that he can save this dark era. Even if he is clumsy, my father said that some people are born to bring light to others. We follow him. We only hope to see a miracle. That is all. Carglass did not say anything and only nodded seriously. He watched as the weak noble lady turned around and walked back into the house. There seemed to be some kind of determination in her, and the same kind of determination burned in his heart. He turned around. Countless pairs of bright eyes focused on him. Every young person had the same mark on them. They had come here from the loop of trade winds, and they had witnessed a miracle with their own eyes. In the endless darkness of the storm, a pillar of light pierced through the heavens and earth. It was an unforgettable sight. The person who brought light was now in this city. In the midst of this pitch-black windstorm, he raised his sword. Amandina looked at the youths one last time, watching their white armor disappear into the rain one by one. Perhaps they should be called the White Lion Legion now. They carried the ideals of this era, and walked out of a glorious period of history under her leadership. What kind of change would this bring to the kingdom? Or would it be a splash in the long river of history? Amandina silently opened the door and saw the Roman sitting upright. She was originally worried that the young lady would treat Princess Magadal as a toy, but now she could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Roman? Amandina. The Roman said seriously. Yes. Amandina was slightly startled. In her impression, the young lady who always prided herself as a great merchant had never acted like this. Amandina, I'm sorry, Amandina nodded. But the Roman is about to go to Brando. What? Wait, you can't? Amandina was shocked. The young people of the White Lion Legion were about to depart, and they who had no combat ability had to immediately board the ship and meet up with Brando in the open sea. At this time, the Roman must not be in any trouble. But before she could finish speaking, she suddenly found that she could not move. Roman, you despicable. Amandina listened to the Roman. The Roman stared into Amandina's eyes, giving her a fright. She had never seen him like this before. Brando is in danger. This is a trap and only the Roman can help him. Amandina, so the Roman is about to leave. I'll leave Princess Magadal to you, please take good care of her. This is the mission Brando gave to the little Roman, and now the little Roman is passing it to you. When the young lady finished speaking, she had already pushed the door open and left. Amandina only heard her last sentence. Sister White, let's go. Please hurry, Princess Magadal told me that there is not much time left. Her face was pale. P.S. A 6,000-word chapter. Because the plot is together, I did not separate it. You know what I mean. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.